I never planned to return to my stepmother's house that October evening in Fayetteville, but duty can make you show up even when every part of you wants to stay away. I had just finished a long week at Fort Liberty, the kind that leaves a captain running on muscle memory more than rest, and all I wanted was a quiet night with my dog Nova. Instead, I parked in front of Joanne's house and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, reminding myself that I was here for nothing more than a family cookout. The air smelled like charcoal and wet leaves drifting in from the neighbor's yard, and the sun was slipping behind the pine trees. I stepped out, smoothing the front of my off-duty shirt, as if that would make the tension any easier. The back gate creaked as I walked into the yard, and just like every time before, all eyes turned toward me. Joanne looked me up and down as if checking for scratches on a rented car, then forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "Avery, you are late." She said it loudly enough for everyone to hear. Dylan was standing near the grill, already drinking something from a red cup, his cheeks flushed, his posture lazy with anger simmering underneath. Of course she had told him about my promotion to captain. Of course he hated it. The moment I walked in, he announced, "Here comes the hero." The yard went awkwardly quiet, and then the murmurs started, mostly the same old jokes about military paychecks and how lucky I was to have benefits. They treated me like a walking bank account. I had been home for less than 5 minutes, and the old pattern was already squeezing my ribs. I raised my voice just enough to cut through the noise. "I will only stay for an hour." Joanne waved her hand as if dismissing a waitress. "We will see." Her tone had that familiar coldness, the one she used whenever she wanted to remind me this was her territory, not mine. Dylan kept chugging from his cup, staring at me with an expression that grew darker every second. I tried to ignore him. I tried to breathe. I tried to pretend this was just another uncomfortable visit, but there was something different in the air, something sharp. When I passed by the porch, Dylan suddenly stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "So, Captain Lockwood," he drawled, dragging out the title as if it tasted sour. "You think you are better than us." I did not answer. Sometimes silence is the only thing that is safe. He took my silence personally. His face flushed even redder. "Oh, look, she is doing that military freeze thing." He jabbed a finger near my face. The others pretended not to notice, but I could feel their attention tightening around us like a rope. I stepped back. Dylan followed. "Who do you think you are, Avery?" I said calmly. "I came here to eat, not to fight." That was the spark. Something in him snapped. He grabbed my wrist and yanked me toward the back of the yard near the shed where porch lights barely reached. The movement was sudden, rough enough that a few relatives gasped, but no one moved. No one ever moved when Dylan acted out. The smell of alcohol hit my face when he leaned in close. "You think you can talk to me like that?" His voice trembled, and not from fear. I had seen men like him in training, men who thought dominance was loud, men who confused cruelty with strength. I kept my face still, my breathing even. That seemed to enrage him further. Then he did something I could never have predicted, even with 12 years of army training. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a Glock. I recognized the shape instantly. My body reacted before my mind could even name what I was seeing. He lifted it to my forehead, pressing the muzzle against my skin. The metal was cold, and the world around us disappeared into a ringing silence. Someone behind him screamed. Joanne shouted, "Put that thing down right now," but she did not move toward us. No one did. "You think you scare me?" he hissed. "All those medals, all that training. Look at you now." I kept my eyes steady on his. No flinch, no tremor, no plea. I was not frozen. I was calculating. I shifted my weight just slightly, preparing for whatever he thought he was capable of. He pushed the muzzle harder against my skin. "Say something," he demanded. When I did not, he raised his voice. "Say something." My pulse slowed the way it always did during danger. It felt like the air thickened around us. Then everything happened in a single, violent blur. He tightened his grip. His finger jerked. A deafening bang tore the night open. A hot spray hit my cheek. Shouts erupted behind us, but I was still standing. Dylan was not. He screamed, falling backward, clutching his own arm. Blood streamed between his fingers, bright red under the porch light. The bullet had gone straight through his forearm when I twisted his wrist at the last second, redirecting the shot. He collapsed against the grass, his drink spilling beside him. Every cousin, aunt, and neighbor froze like statues. Joanne ran toward him, shrieking, "Avery, what have you done?" I stood perfectly still, feeling the cold October air fill my lungs, steady and slow. I whispered more to myself than to anyone else. He fired the shot. The yard spun into chaos, but inside my mind there was only silence. Sharp, clean silence, the kind that comes right before everything changes. For a moment after the shot, the world felt like it had been wrapped in thick cotton. Sound came in slow, uneven waves. Dylan's scream. Joanne shouting his name. Someone yelling to get towels. Someone else saying, "Call for help." But through all of it, my body remained steady the same way it had on deployment when chaos erupted, and the only way to survive was to let your training speak louder than your fear. I dropped into a kneel beside him, not to comfort him, but to make sure he no longer had control of the weapon. The Glock had fallen into the grass, half buried in pine straw. I kicked it a safe distance away, then turned my hips to block anyone from picking it up. My breathing stayed calm, even, but my pulse hammered with the realization that this was no training exercise. This was my family, my blood, and yet none of this felt like home. Joanne stumbled toward us, her hands shaking so badly she nearly tripped. She knelt beside Dylan, her voice sharp with panic. "Look what you made him do!" She shrieked the accusation, slicing through the yard like a blade. "He shot himself because of you." I kept my eyes on Dylan's arm, noting the bleeding was steady but not spurting. A through and through wound, painful but survivable. I reached into my pocket for my phone and dialed emergency services. The dispatcher answered with a calm, clipped tone that instantly grounded me. I reported the situation clearly, stating that a firearm had discharged and that an adult male was injured but breathing. The dispatcher told me deputies and medical units were on the way and asked me to remain on the line. I answered every question just as I had trained soldiers to do 1,000 times. No panic, no rambling, only facts. Behind me, Joanne kept wailing and attempting to push me aside, but I stayed exactly where I needed to be to secure the scene. The dispatcher asked if the weapon was still nearby, and I confirmed it was several feet away. When I ended the call, Joanne slapped my arm hard enough to sting. "You stood there and let him do this!" She yelled again. "You always bring trouble into this house." Her voice cracked on the last word. I slowly stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees. My tone never rose, not even a fraction. "The neighbor's camera will show what happened," I said quietly. Her eyes widened at that, and for the first time there was something like fear in them, but not the kind any parent should feel. Not concern, not guilt. Fear of consequences. I felt the shift like a change in temperature. Other relatives backed away, their expressions stiff and unreadable. No one approached me. No one said, "Avery, are you all right?" It was as if they were all waiting to decide whose side they should take. The distant wail of sirens began to build, and the yard fell silent except for Dylan's groans and Joanne's soft, desperate whispers. When the first deputies arrived, they immediately separated me from the others, guiding me toward the driveway with professional caution. A female deputy stood in front of me, her hand resting near her belt, not threatening, but ready. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to remain right here until we understand what happened." Her voice was steady, but her eyes scanned my face, arms, and clothing, as if looking for signs that I was the one who had pulled the trigger. I nodded once. "I understand." They led Joanne and the others to the opposite side of the yard. I could hear her loud, frantic voice carrying across the lawn. "My boy is hurt. Arrest her." She tried to take his gun, and it went off. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the sting of her words sink in. It should not have surprised me. Joanne had always been quick to shift blame whenever Dylan messed up, but something about hearing her accuse me when I had just saved his life burned in my chest like dry ice. A detective approached me with a small notebook in his hand. "Ma'am, I am Detective Rowan with Cumberland County. I need your version of what happened. Do you need a lawyer present?" The question hung between us, heavy with implication. I squared my shoulders. "No, sir, I do not need a lawyer. I am a soldier. I know how to give a statement." He studied my face for a long moment, as if measuring whether he believed me. Then he nodded for me to continue. I told him everything plainly. Dylan's behavior throughout the evening, how he pulled me aside, how he pointed the gun at my head, how I redirected his wrist at the exact moment the shot discharged. I spoke with the same clarity I used in after-action reports. No emotion, no commentary, only what happened. When I finished, he scribbled the final note and closed his notebook. "Did you handle the weapon at any point?" I shook my head. My fingerprints should only be on the part of his wrist I pushed. The detective watched me exhale through my nose slowly, the way soldiers do when they are grounding themselves, the way people do when they have seen more than they want to admit. He opened his mouth to ask another question, but was interrupted by a deputy calling for him near the ambulance. He excused himself and jogged over. I remained where I was instructed to stand, hands visible, posture neutral. The ambulance lights flashed over the yard, bathing everything in a frantic red glow. Medics hurried Dylan into the vehicle, his face pale, his shirt stained. Joanne begged to ride with him, but a medic shook his head and guided her back. Another deputy approached me, this one younger, his expression a mix of confusion and caution. "Ma'am, this is just a routine question," he said. "Are you sure you do not want legal counsel?" I looked at him and let every ounce of my training push forward. "Deputy, I know the law. I know the rules of force. I know how this works." He swallowed hard but nodded. I could almost feel the shift in his demeanor. Not fear, not suspicion. Respect. The first hard wave of emotion hit me then, not because of what Dylan had done, but because of what my family was already doing. From across the yard, I saw Joanne glaring at me with an anger that held no regret, only calculation. In that moment, the truth cut deeper than the gunshot ever could. Dylan had aimed the weapon, but Joanne was the one who had fired the first betrayal. By the time the deputies released me, it was past midnight, and the October air in Fayetteville had turned sharp enough to sting my cheeks. They did not arrest me. They did not handcuff me. They simply told me I would be contacted after the detective reviewed the evidence. I nodded, thanked them for their professionalism, and drove back toward Fort Liberty with my hands steady on the wheel, even though my mind felt like a snow globe someone had just shaken. The base gates glowed under floodlights as I approached, and the familiarity of it hit me in a way I had not expected. Civilian streets had felt dangerous not because of strangers, but because of my own family, and now the flat, firm voice of the military police greeting me, "Ma'am ID, please," felt like the first truly safe moment of the night. I returned the greeting, showed my CAC card, and drove forward through the gates. The world inside the installation was quiet, structured, predictable. For the first time since the gun went off, my shoulders began to loosen. Instead of going home, I turned toward Womack Army Medical Center, knowing exactly what my commander would expect. Any soldier involved in a major incident, even off duty, had to be medically evaluated for stress. I was not injured, but rules were rules, and sometimes following the rules is the only thing that keeps you from falling apart. The lobby was nearly empty, except for a pair of night shift nurses chatting softly near the desk. One of them looked up when I walked in. "Captain, can we help you?" I nodded once. "Off-duty firearm-related trauma. I need a stress evaluation." Their expressions sharpened with understanding, but not judgment. They directed me to a small exam room with bright white lights and walls that smelled faintly of antiseptic. I sat on the table and breathed in the sterile air, feeling the exhaustion settle deep in my bones. A young physician assistant entered, clipboard in hand. He checked my vitals, asked a series of questions about dizziness, chest tightness, headaches, and emotional status. I answered everything honestly. No dizziness, no chest pain, no panic, just extreme adrenaline depletion. After 30 minutes, he cleared me medically but insisted I report to my chain of command first thing in the morning, which was exactly what I planned to do anyway. When I finally stepped out into the quiet parking lot, the sun was just beginning to rise, peeking over the tops of the longleaf pines. The sky glowed orange and soft purple, the kind of sky that usually brings me peace. Not today. I drove straight to the battalion headquarters. The building lights were already on, which meant my commander was in early, a habit I had always respected about her. CPT Mariah Green was the kind of officer who carried herself with the authority of someone who never needed to raise her voice. Tall, sharp-minded, calm under pressure. She had been my mentor since the first year I arrived at Fort Liberty. When I knocked on her door, she told me to enter without looking up from her paperwork. But the moment she saw my face, she put her pen down. "Lockwood, sit down, now!" There was no softness in her tone, only focused attention. I sat and waited while she observed me the way commanders observe soldiers after a blast during deployment. Slowly, carefully reading the posture, the breathing, the eyes. "Start from the beginning," she said. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the cookout, about Dylan pulling me aside, about the gun, the cold metal against my forehead, the bang, the way he dropped, the way Joanne blamed me within seconds. I told her about the deputies, the statement, the accusations that sprouted like weeds before the blood on the ground had even dried. She listened without interrupting, without blinking too much, without letting her expression reveal anything. When I finished, she let out a long, slow breath. "Captain," she said, her voice firm, "you handled yourself correctly according to AR 190-14. You did not escalate. You did not initiate. You responded to a lethal threat. That is the law. That is the training." She held my gaze. "You acted within the boundaries of self-defense under both state law and Army regulation." I nodded but said nothing. She leaned back in her chair, studying me more closely. "This is precisely why I tell my soldiers that the hardest battles are the ones fought at home." Then she added the words that shifted the entire tone of the morning. "Especially for you. Twice deployed. 12 years of service." I blinked once. She rarely mentioned my deployments. I rarely mentioned them to anyone. Most people at the cookout had no idea who I was beyond someone they could pull money from. They had never seen me in uniform, never seen the sandstorms that clawed at my eyes during convoy missions, never seen me wake up from nights where incoming rounds cracked too close to the tents. But my commander knew. She knew everything in my file, including the parts that were redacted for everyone else. I had deployed twice, once to Kuwait and once to a region that was never mentioned by name in public reports. The kind of deployment that leaves a quiet mark behind your ribs long after you return. CPT Green tapped her pen on the desk. "Your composure last night was not luck. It was discipline sharpened by experience. Not everyone would have remained that calm with a weapon in their face." I swallowed hard because hearing it said aloud made something inside me tremble. Not fear. Recognition. Until that moment, I had been moving through the night on instinct, but now that instinct was being named, validated. She leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "I want you to take the day to rest. Do not show up to motor pool. Do not answer any non-essential calls. Let CID contact you. Follow the process." Her voice softened just slightly. "And Captain, remember this. What happened to you was not your fault. The fact that you survived is because you are trained. You are disciplined. You did what was necessary." For a second, my throat tightened. I had stood strong through the shot, through the chaos, through the accusations, but hearing someone finally treat me like I mattered, like I was someone worth protecting, pulled a different kind of ache from my chest. It was not pain, it was relief. I stood to leave, but she raised a hand, stopping me. "And Avery," she said quietly, "before you go, when this is over, you need to remember something. You owe your family nothing, not after last night." Her words struck deep because they were true, because they were something I had never allowed myself to admit. When I stepped outside the building, the morning sun felt different, warmer, steadier, almost like a hand on my back. For the first time since the gunshot, I felt like I could breathe again, not because the danger had passed, but because someone finally saw me for who I really was. Not the easy target my family painted, not the silent wallet they leaned on, not the problem they blamed. I was a soldier, a survivor, a captain, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Driving back to my apartment just outside the Randall Parkway gate, I kept replaying CPT Green's last sentence in my head, the one about not owing my family anything. It echoed in a place I had spent years trying to make quiet. I had learned early how to silence my own needs, how to tighten the seams around my memories until they barely leaked. But after last night, those seams felt stretched thin. On the surface, it might have looked like Dylan snapping with a gun was the true explosion, but in reality, the fuse had been burning for 16 years long before I put on a uniform, long before I learned how to keep my voice steady under pressure. It started the year I turned 15 when my father remarried. My mother had passed when I was 9, and for years it had just been Dad and me. A small, quiet house filled with the scent of his coffee and the scratchy sound of old country records he still played on weekends. Then Joanne arrived with her sharp perfume high heels and a son who walked into our home like he was inheriting it. At first, I tried. I set the dinner table the way she liked. I kept my room spotless. I stayed out of the way. But Joanne drifted into our lives like smoke and slowly suffocated every trace of who we used to be. She had a talent for controlling a room, not with kindness, not with warmth, but with a cold, measured disapproval that seemed to follow me everywhere. Dad began shrinking under her voice, the way people shrink under winter wind, pulling jackets, tighter shoulders, narrower eyes, lower. He stopped listening to music. He stopped inviting neighbors over for weekend cookouts. He even stopped laughing in that easy, rumbling way I used to chase through the house like sunlight. Around the same time, Dylan started getting away with things that would have landed me grounded for months. He could break curfews, skip school, push responsibilities onto others, and Joanne would defend him without hesitation. "Boys will be boys," she'd say, brushing off his worst behavior as if it were charming mischief. But I was never given the same grace. I was the responsible one, the hard-working one, the one expected to compensate for everyone else's shortcomings. When I joined the Army at 18, my father hugged me so tightly I thought he might crack a rib. Joanne barely looked up from her phone. Dylan asked whether I would be sending money home. At the time, I thought he was joking. He was not. Basic training was the hardest physical thing I had ever done, but it paled compared to the emotional weight of every phone call home where Joanne hinted at bills piling up or the cost of something Dylan needed. She never asked directly. Manipulation was her favorite language, so I sent what I could. 20 here, 50 there, sometimes more when deployment pay came in because guilt has a way of convincing you that you owe people things they never earned. My father rarely spoke on the phone during those years. When he did, his voice sounded thin, tired, as if someone had turned down the volume on the man he used to be. I visited when leave permitted, but Joanne always managed to make those visits feel like intrusions instead of reunions. I'd sit at the dinner table listening to her complain about the cost of groceries while Dylan bragged about doing nothing productive. Dad would stare at his plate as if he were waiting for permission to speak. I used to think he stayed quiet because he did not want conflict, but with age, I realized silence sometimes means surrender. When he passed away in 2021, a small part of me broke in a way I could not put into words. The doctors said heart failure, but the truth is that some hearts break long before they stop beating. At the funeral, I watched Joanne accept sympathy as if she were the only one grieving, as if she were the guardian of his memory. I had not even finished folding his flag before she pulled me aside and said in a clipped tone that the insurance was hers. I did not argue. I was active duty and headed back overseas in 2 weeks. I told myself that the money was not worth fighting about, that Dad would not have wanted me entangled in bitterness, but deep down, it felt like a theft not just of finances, but of history, of love, of everything we shared before she arrived. After that, I kept my distance. I sent holiday cards with polite messages. I called on birthdays. I visited occasionally out of obligation, not affection. Whenever I was home, Joanne always managed to mention how Dylan was struggling, how they could use help, how families should support each other. And because I had been conditioned since 15 to carry the emotional weight of everyone else, I always tried to do something even when it chipped at my own stability. People think toxic families become toxic overnight, but the truth is they take shape slowly forming from layers of small manipulations from moments when you swallow your needs to keep peace from years spent convincing yourself that the treatment you receive is the price for belonging. Standing in my living room with the morning light slipping through the blinds, I realized that Joanne and Dylan had never seen me as family, not in the way that matters. I had been a resource, a bank account, a quiet servant who never said no. And last night, when a gun was pointed at my head, I understood something with a clarity that felt like cold water poured down my spine. They had never loved me. Not really. Love does not twist your arm into responsibilities you never agreed to. Love does not watch you face danger and blame you while you are still catching your breath. Love certainly does not turn a crime into a lie just to avoid accountability. In that moment, the memory of Joanne shouting you made him do this echoed louder than the gunshot itself. For the first time in my adult life, I did not try to justify it or excuse it. Instead, I let the truth sit heavy in my hands. My father had been controlled. Dylan had been spoiled into cruelty. I had been drained emotionally and financially. And when Dad died, Joanne had consumed everything he left behind without remorse. No part of that was love. It was extraction. It was using me until something better came along. Realizing that truth was not painful. It was awakening, the kind that makes your spine straighten and your lungs expand a little lighter, because sometimes understanding what you lost opens the door to understanding what you deserve. And for the first time since I was 15, I realized I did not deserve them. The call came earlier than I expected, just before noon, while I was sitting at my kitchen table staring into a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. My phone vibrated across the wood, and when I saw the number from Cumberland County, I felt my spine stiffen. I answered calmly, the way soldiers do when they expect the next words to matter. "Captain Lockwood, this is Detective Rowan. We need you to come in to clarify a few inconsistencies in the statements given this morning." The tone was neutral but firm. Inconsistencies was never a good word. I told him I would be there within the hour, grabbed my keys, and headed out. The drive to the sheriff's office was short, but my thoughts stretched the minutes long and thin. I replayed the scene from last night again and again, not doubting my actions but sensing the shape of something darker forming in the background. Joanne had been screaming before the deputies even reached us. She would not have quieted overnight. And Dylan, even injured, had always known how to twist things when it benefited him. When I arrived, the lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. A deputy escorted me to a small interview room with beige walls and a metal table. The room was meant to feel neutral, but it carried the weight of all the stories people tried to rewrite inside it. Detective Rowan entered with a manila folder and a recorder. He greeted me with professional courtesy, then sat down across from me, his expression unreadable. "Captain, I am going to be direct," he said. "The statements given by your stepmother and stepbrother differ significantly from the account you gave last night." My breath stayed steady, but something iced over behind my ribs. What did they say? He opened the folder and began reading. "Joanne claims you became aggressive during an argument and attempted to wrestle the gun away from Dylan. She says the firearm discharged when you yanked his arm." I stared at him, unable to hide the flicker of disbelief. "She said I attacked him." "Yes," he continued. "She insists that Dylan was trying to calm the situation when you grabbed his wrist." I shook my head slowly, letting the weight of it settle. "And Dylan," he swallowed. "He is conscious now. He told medical staff that you lunged for the weapon, that he did not intend to point it at you." My fingers curled slightly against the table. He pointed it at my head. He pressed it to my skin. I redirected his wrist. The detective tapped his pen once. "That is not their version." The room felt smaller. He watched my reaction closely, the way investigators do when they want to see whether you crack. But instead of anger, I felt something colder and more painful unraveling inside me. Betrayal is not loud. It does not come as a shout or a punch. It comes quietly sliding into your bones when you realize someone you once called family is willing to let you bleed if it helps them escape consequences. I did not yell. I did not defend myself. I did not argue. I simply straightened my posture and said, "I stand by my statement." Detective Rowan nodded, though a shadow of caution settled in his features. He leaned back in his chair. "Captain, given the conflicting accounts, we have to consider all possibilities. That includes the possibility that you escalated." I understood. Investigations deal in facts, not emotion. But the sting of hearing it spoken aloud cut deeper than the question itself. For years, I had been the one who de-escalated in that household, the one who kept peace, the one who tried to be fair, even when fairness was never extended to me. To sit in that room and hear that my family framed me as the aggressor made my stomach turn. He continued, "Until we have the full picture, you will be considered a subject in the investigation, not just a witness." I nodded once. "Understood." He paused, searching my face. Do you want a lawyer now? I met his eyes. No, I want the truth. He watched me for a moment that stretched long enough to become its own language, then closed the manila folder. We will contact you when we finish reviewing evidence. You are free to go, but do not leave the county without notifying us. A deputy escorted me back to the lobby where sunlight streamed through the front windows in long, pale lines. I stepped outside into the warm, midday air and for a moment simply stood there, letting the truth settle in a way that felt heavier than any rucksack I had carried on deployment. They chose to lie. They chose to twist the story. They chose him over me even when he had been the one holding the weapon, even when I had saved his life, even when they had seen fear in each other's eyes, but pretended it belonged to me. As I walked to my truck, a familiar ache coiled in my chest, not quite pain, but disappointment sharpened into something more. This was the second betrayal, and this one cut deeper because it was not born of panic. It was intentional, a decision. They had flipped the narrative long before the detective even called me. In toxic families, truth is not something to be honored. It is something to be shaped and weaponized. To them, I was not a daughter or sister. I was a shield, a scapegoat, a convenient container to pour guilt into whenever Dylan made a mess he could not charm his way out of. I climbed into my truck and shut the door, letting the silence settle around me. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked tired but steady. I had survived worse. I had survived sandstorms and nights when the radio crackled with warnings. I had survived convoy routes where the ground itself was unpredictable. I could survive this. But something important shifted inside me. A line that had been blurred for years finally sharpened with painful clarity. Family is supposed to protect you. Mine had pointed a weapon at me. Family is supposed to defend you. Mine had accused me. Family is supposed to speak truth. Mine had rewritten it to save themselves. I turned the key in the ignition and exhaled a long, slow breath. I would not fight with screaming. I would not fight with emotion. I would not fight with fear. I would fight the way soldiers fight with patience, with truth, with discipline. If they wanted to twist the story, the law would untwist it. If they wanted lies, the evidence would cut through them. And for the first time in my life, I felt no guilt for letting them face the consequences they had chosen. My silence was no longer surrender. It was preparation. The rest of the afternoon moved in slow, uneven hours that felt heavier than any ruck march I had carried through desert heat. I tried to focus on routine small tasks like sweeping the kitchen or organizing gear in my closet, things soldiers do when the world feels too loud. But every movement felt strained by the memory of sitting in that interview room, hearing the detective say the words "subject of the investigation." Joanne and Dylan's lies still echoed through my mind like the aftershock of an explosion. By early evening, I stepped outside to breathe air that didn't taste like recycled fear. The sun was dipping lower behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the sidewalks of my apartment complex. I walked toward my truck, intending to clear my mind with a quiet drive when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, expecting the sheriff's office, but instead a familiar, gravelly voice crackled through the speaker. "Avery, this is Harris from next door to your folks' place." My heart jumped. Mr. Harris was the 70-year-old Marine veteran who lived across from Joanne's house. He used to talk to my dad over the fence about deployments and duty and the kind of discipline that never gets old. I had always respected him because his words carried the weight of someone who had seen things and survived them. I cleared my throat. "Yes, sir." "Everything all right?" There was a short pause before he said the sentence that stopped the world around me. My camera caught the whole thing, kid. My breath hitched. "Sir, your camera." He continued talking as if this were a casual weather report. "Front yard camera. It faces the street, but angled enough that it picked up that whole mess behind your stepmother's house." I stood there, frozen hand gripping the phone a little too tightly. He added I watched the footage this afternoon. "You need to see it. Bring a hard drive." The relief that washed through me was sharp enough to sting. For hours I had been replaying the sheriff's doubts and my family's lies and the feeling of being cornered by the very people who should have had my back. Now, for the first time since the gunshot, I felt something shift. Hope, but stronger than that justice beginning to breathe. I got in my truck and drove to his house in Fayetteville, the same house with the faded Marine Corps flag hanging proudly near the mailbox. Harris opened the door before I even knocked, as if he had been waiting right there for me. He wore an old USMC sweatshirt, sleeves pushed to his elbows, revealing forearms still strong despite his age. His posture straightened when he saw me. "Come in, Captain." His tone was respectful but warm. He led me into his living room, where a laptop sat open on a small wooden table. The room smelled like pipe tobacco and lemon cleaner, a scent that reminded me of my father. I handed him the small external drive I kept for field backups. He nodded, then clicked a folder on his screen. The first freeze frame made my throat tighten. It was Dylan, standing in the backyard, arm raised, gun pressed against my forehead. Harris leaned back in his chair, watching me instead of the screen. "Thought you might need proof instead of hearsay." My eyes burned for a moment, and I blinked hard, forcing the emotion down into the place where soldiers store it when they cannot afford to show it. "Thank you, sir," I whispered, because there was not a single word in the English language strong enough to convey what this meant. He hit play. The footage was grainy due to evening light, but clear enough to show every detail that mattered. Dylan grabbing my wrist, me stepping back, the muzzle against my skin, his jaw tensed with rage. The moment I twisted his wrist, the instant the gun fired, the recoil, the scream, the fall, everything exactly as it had happened. Not my version, not their version, the truth. When the clip ended, Harris paused the screen and tapped the frame with one blunt finger. "Anyone with common sense can see you defended yourself. In my day, we called that proper training." I exhaled a shaky breath. "Sir, this could clear everything," he grunted. "Damn right it will. The law favors truth, and that video has no loyalty to anyone but the camera that recorded it." He transferred the footage onto my drive, then surprised me by placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "I served before you were born," he said quietly, and I know the look of someone who never expected help from home. "You are not alone in this fight." That sentence hit harder than the footage. For the first time in years, I felt something warm crack open in a place I had long since boarded shut. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Thank you, sir. Truly." He shrugged, as if helping me was no more remarkable than handing someone a wrench. "Marines look out for soldiers, too." When I left his house, the sun had dipped completely behind the horizon. Streetlights hummed to life, casting a warm golden glow across the pavement. I sat in my truck with the drive in my hands and allowed myself a moment, a single breath where the world felt steady. This was the justice awakening, the moment when the truth finally stepped out of the shadows and stood beside me. Not because I begged for it, not because someone in my family chose to speak up, but because a stranger with integrity decided the truth mattered. On the drive home, I let silence fill the cab except for the soft hum of the engine. I replayed the clip in my mind frame by frame, and with every replay, something inside me tightened into steel. Joanne could spin her story. Dylan could lie through his teeth. The sheriff could question my actions. But the camera never lied. And tomorrow, when the detective called me again, when they brought me in for another interview, when they thought they had me cornered, I would place that drive on the table, slide it across the metal, and let the truth speak for me. For the first time since the gun went off, I felt the ground shift beneath me, not with danger, but with certainty. Last night had tried to break me. Today handed me the proof I needed to fight back. Quietly, legally, relentlessly. Justice had begun to wake up, and it was on my side. I barely slept that night. The kind of sleep where your body lies down, but your mind marches in circles until dawn. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the gun, the muzzle pressed against my forehead, the flash, the spray, the way Dylan collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. But stronger than all of it was the image of the video freeze frame, the truth that finally had a voice. By 8 in the morning, I was already dressed in my duty uniform, even though I was technically off for the day. Something about the uniform grounded me. It reminded me that discipline did not come from the people who raised me. It came from the life I had chosen for myself. At 9:30, my phone rang. Detectives Rowan and Yates needed me to come in for further clarification. Their tone was formal, but less clipped than yesterday. I drove to the sheriff's office with the hard drive in my pocket and a calmness that felt sharper than fear. When I entered the lobby, the deputy at the front desk stood a little straighter than the day before. He nodded to me. "Captain Lockwood, they are waiting in interview room 2. That shift in tone did not escape me. Respect often arrives when evidence does. When I stepped into the room, Detective Rowan looked up mid-sentence, then immediately stopped speaking. Detective Yates sat beside him tapping a pen against her pad. They had reviewed something already. Something big. I placed the drive on the table without being asked. "Evidence from a neighbor," I said. "Camera angle covers the incident." Detective Rowan exchanged a glance with Yates. "We received a copy earlier this morning," he said. "Mr. Harris emailed it directly to our system before you arrived." "Of course he did. Marines do not wait. They act." Rowan cleared his throat and tapped a key on the laptop beside him. A still image appeared on the screen. Dylan, arm extended, gun pressed to my forehead. The photo alone said more than hours of interviews ever could. He pressed play. The room filled with the muffled backyard audio, the scrape of Dylan's shoes, the tremble in his voice the moment he pushed the muzzle harder against my skin. My own voice steady, controlled. Then the blur of movement as I redirected his wrist. The gun went off the recoil, jarring both of us, and Dylan screamed, falling backward. Not a single frame supported the story they had told. When the clip ended, Rowan sat back slowly, folding his arms across his chest. "Captain," he said in a tone completely different from yesterday, "you saved your own life. You did not attack him. You defended yourself from a deadly threat." Those words hit me harder than the gunshot. Somewhere behind my ribs, something unclenched. Detective Yates leaned forward, elbows on the table. "And let me be very clear," she added, "your stepbrother's statement is now classified as a false report. He is claiming you initiated force. That video disproves it entirely. False accusation in North Carolina is not a minor charge, especially in a case involving a firearm." Her voice carried no sympathy for him, only the weight of legal consequence. Detective Rowan continued, "As of this morning, Dylan Lockwood is now facing potential charges for lying to investigators in addition to unlawful possession of a firearm and assault with a deadly weapon. His lies could bury him deeper than the bullet wound ever will." I inhaled slowly, letting that truth settle like dust. They motioned for me to sit back as they added notes to the folders in front of them. Then Rowan leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. "Captain, I need to ask you something." I nodded. "Did you know your stepmother came in earlier today?" My pulse stilled. "No. Why?" He sighed. "She showed up crying, screaming, demanding that we delete the footage, claiming it invades her privacy." He made air quotes with his fingers. "She said releasing it would ruin her family." I looked down at my gloves resting neatly in my lap. "She never said the footage was false. She only wanted it gone." Yates nodded. "Because she knows it proves everything she tried to deny." Rowan added she begged us to erase it. I raised my eyes, slowly studying their expressions. "And did you?" Yates almost laughed. "Absolutely not. That video is evidence." And then Rowan leaned forward again, his expression shifting into something I had not seen from him before. A kind of quiet respect. "Your stepmother also asked for one more thing. She wanted you to choose not to press the issue. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding." I felt a slow, cold calm spread through me. The same calm I had felt when the gun pressed against my forehead. The same calm I had used to survive deployments. I answered with the quietest voice in the room, but the most certain. "No, I will not withdraw anything." Rowan nodded as if he expected that. Her exact words were, "Please tell her to let us fix this privately." "And your answer." I met his eyes. "This is not private. This is evidence. This is law." She chose her side. He closed the folder. "Then so be it." Yates added that Dylan would be interviewed again under the new classification, and that the district attorney would likely pursue charges against both of them, Joanne for obstruction and false statements, Dylan for assault and lying to investigators. The tide was shifting, not in my favor, in truth's favor. When they dismissed me, I stood to leave, but Rowan stopped me at the door. "Captain," I turned. For what it is worth, you handled yourself better than 90% of civilians we interview, and better than a lot of soldiers, too. You did nothing wrong." His words were steady, not performative. Not pity. Respect earned, not given. I walked out of the station into the bright afternoon light and stood on the steps for a long moment, letting the sun warm the back of my neck. Cars passed on the street. People walked into the courthouse across the lot. Life moved on as if last night had been just another incident. But for me, this was the moment something fundamental shifted. This was the moment the truth stepped into the open and stood taller than the lies. This was the moment I no longer had to defend myself with words. Evidence had spoken. And as I walked toward my truck, the world felt a little less heavy. Not because the danger was over, but because justice had finally taken its first full breath. The morning after the detectives confirmed the truth, I expected to feel lighter, freer, vindicated. Instead, I felt something far more complex tightening in my chest. Civilian law had finally shifted in my favor, but the military has its own rules, its own expectations, and I knew that even off-duty incidents involving violence weapons or family disputes could trigger a review under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Justice in the civilian world was one thing. Justice inside the Army was another beast entirely, and that morning the beast came knocking. CID requested my presence at 1300 hours. Their message was short, formal, and carried the tone of an appointment no soldier wanted. Captain Lockwood report to Criminal Investigation Division for administrative review. A review, not an accusation, not an Article 15. But reviews had a way of pulling every thread of your life into the light. I had seen it happen to other soldiers. The Army does not care about your excuses, your childhood, your family drama. They care about conduct discipline and whether you remained within the boundaries of regulation. And last night a gun had gone off. So I put on my uniform again, straightened every crease, and tied my hair in a bun so tight it pulled my heartbeat into my scalp. At 12:55, I walked into the CID building, the air inside colder than outside, the walls painted in dull beige, like they were meant to mute emotion. A special agent named Torres met me at the front. He was tall, quiet, and moved with the controlled precision of someone who had spent years reading lies off people's faces. "Captain Lockwood," he greeted. "Follow me." His tone held no warmth and no hostility. Just duty. We entered an interview room that looked just like the one at the sheriff's office, metal table, recorder, blank walls, but somehow this one felt heavier. The Army adds pressure by simply existing around you. Another agent, a woman with sharp features and a folder thick enough to make my stomach clench, sat across from me. She introduced herself as S.A. Kim. "Captain, we've already received the civilian report," she said. "This review is to determine whether your actions fall within acceptable self-defense parameters under both state law and the UCMJ. I nodded. "I understand. We'll begin with your statement. Please provide everything in chronological order. Leave nothing out." Nothing out. Even the moments where fear threatened to swallow me. Even the moments where training edged out instinct. Even the pieces that made me look vulnerable. Vulnerability is never comfortable for soldiers. Still, I told them everything. How Dylan pulled me aside. How he pressed the gun to my forehead. How I shifted my weight. How I redirected his wrist. How the gun discharged. How every scream and accusation afterward felt like a second bullet. S.A. Kim took notes with meticulous patience. At the end, she slid a form toward me, DA Form 2823, the sworn statement form soldiers fill out whenever something serious happens. Write it exactly as you've said, word for word, sign at the bottom. Writing the statement brought a new weight to the experience. Saying something aloud meant your voice carried it. Writing it meant the Army would hold it in permanent record forever. I wrote everything. Each sentence felt like releasing a stone I had been carrying in my lungs. When I finished, I pushed the form toward them and locked my hands behind my back, fingers interlaced, posture straight. Agent Torres exchanged a look with Kim. Then he spoke. "Captain Lockwood, based on what we've reviewed so far, including the video, your actions meet the criteria for lawful self-defense under AR 190-14 and state statute. You responded to a lethal threat with proportional force." Relief slid through me like a warm current. My shoulders slackened a fraction. Not enough to break military bearing, but enough to remind me I was human. But then S.A. Kim raised a finger. However, we still need to rule out excessive use of combat training. My stomach tightened again. We need to determine whether the wrist redirection was a standard instinctive defense, or whether specialized training was intentionally applied in a way that constitutes undue force against a civilian. I swallowed. Ma'am, the movement was instinctive. Redirecting the wrist line is basic self-defense, not specialized CQB. She studied me long enough that silence grew thick between us. Then she nodded. We're inclined to agree, Torres added. Had you struck him afterward, pursued him, or escalated, that would be different. But the video shows you disengaged immediately and secured the scene. Secured the scene. Those 3 words felt like a small victory. They told me the Army saw discipline in my actions, not aggression. Still, reviews follow procedure, and procedure required they leave the room to confer privately. When the door shut, the silence wrapped around me like a cold blanket. My breathing stayed steady, but inside my thoughts churned. What if they misinterpreted something? What if they saw one frame wrong? What if Joanne lied to them too? What if the Army believed the wrong person? Soldiers who have served long enough know that sometimes the truth is not enough. Sometimes politics, perception, and timing create storms no amount of honesty can calm. When the agents finally returned, the room seemed brighter. Captain Lockwood S.A. Kim began our preliminary conclusion is that you acted appropriately. Those words hit me like air after drowning. She continued, no UCMJ violation. No excessive use of training. No misconduct. My lungs filled fully for the first time since the gun went off. Agent Torres folded his hands. As far as CID is concerned, you defended yourself. And you did so with restraint. Restraint. Not aggression. Not loss of control. Restraint. That word carried dignity. You are cleared pending final administrative documentation, Kim finished. Command will receive the findings within 48 hours. You may return to regular duties once your commander approves it. Relief washed through me in a warm wave. But beneath it, another emotion simmered, something rougher, something quieter. A sadness I was not ready to unpack. I nodded, thanked them, and stood. As I reached the door, Torres added in a softer tone, Captain, not many would have stayed that calm with a gun to their head. I paused. Training helps, I said. Experience, too, he added knowingly. Experience. Deployment. The things I never brag about. The things I never mention unless duty requires. When I stepped outside, the cool air kissed my face, and the sunlight felt like a hand resting gently on my shoulder. Relief settled first, a deep, steady kind that loosened my spine. Then came worry because the legal fight with my family was far from over. Then slowly, like dawn rising, came something gentler, a sense of being seen, understood, believed. For the first time in years, accountability was no longer aimed at me. It was aimed at them, and I no longer had to defend myself alone. 2 days after CID cleared me, the investigation shifted in a direction I had sensed but never allowed myself to hope for. It started with a phone call from Detective Rowan just after sunrise. His voice was clipped, focused, the tone detectives use when things have escalated beyond routine. Captain Lockwood, we need you aware of developments regarding your stepfamily. Developments. In law enforcement language, that word meant something had cracked. As I drove to Fort Liberty for morning accountability, my phone buzzed again, this time from CPT Green. She wanted me in her office immediately after formation. 2 calls before 8 in the morning meant one thing: the truth had finally begun to expose the shadows my family had been hiding behind for years. After accountability, I walked into CPT Green's office. She gestured for me to close the door. CID contacted me this morning, she said. Her eyes held that mixture of empathy and professional distance she always maintained. There are details you need to know. I sat down, bracing myself. It turns out your stepbrother has a prior firearm charge sealed when he was 18. Unlawful possession. She paused, letting the words sink in. My stomach dropped. CID accessed his record because of the weapon he used on you. Under UCMJ and state law, that fact changes everything. She slid a printed report toward me. And that's not the end of it. I scanned the page. Dylan had been involved in 2 previous incidents. One bar fight where a weapon was found in his vehicle, and another case involving a neighbor who claimed he waved a BB gun at them during an argument. The pattern was unmistakable. Violence, recklessness, impulse control issues. And for years, Joanne defended him every time, painting him as misunderstood or unlucky, never dangerous. I felt heat rise under my collar, not anger, but something sharper clarity. CPT Green continued. Sheriff's investigators also cross-checked financial records when Joanne kept insisting the incident should not affect her insurance. Insurance. My father's insurance. My jaw clenched. Captain, according to the detective, there is strong indication your stepmother committed insurance fraud after your father's death. Underreporting forged signatures claiming benefits she was not legally entitled to. The room felt suddenly small. My breath came slow but heavy. She had not just stolen my father's money. She had lied to the government to do it, and that alone carried real consequences. When I left her office, the world outside felt brighter. Harsher, too, exposed like the truth itself was reflecting off every surface. By noon, Detective Rowan called again. "Captain, can you come in? We have more information." When I arrived at the sheriff's office, the atmosphere was different. Deputies who previously kept their distance now nodded with respectful acknowledgement. One even held the door open for me. Inside. Interview Room 1. Rowan and Yates sat with additional files spread across the metal table. Rowan began. "We wanted to inform you that both your stepbrother and stepmother attempted to alter their statements after learning we obtained the footage." I felt my pulse settle into a heavy, almost numb rhythm. "Of course they did." Yates added, and in doing so, they opened the door for us to dig deeper. Rowan tapped a page in front of him. Dylan's firearm was unregistered. The serial number was partially filed. That constitutes another felony. My breath caught. Another. Yates continued. "As for your stepmother, her calls to our office have grown frantic. She has attempted to claim emotional trauma to stop the investigation." Rowan looked directly at me. "And she tried to convince us that you had always been unstable." I let that sink in. Always unstable. It was a knife disguised as concern. Toxic families use that blade often, quietly, strategically. But the detectives didn't buy it. Rowan leaned forward. "Captain, the more we investigate, the more we uncover a pattern of behavior centered around protecting Dylan at any cost, even at the expense of your safety. At any cost." My hands loosened in my lap. Something inside me felt like old cement cracking. The next blow in the investigation came faster than expected. Around 4 that afternoon, Rowan called again this time, sounding irritated. "Captain Dylan has checked himself out of the hospital without medical clearance." My heart paused mid-beat. He did what? He continued talking, each word tightening the air. "He left against medical advice. We issued a pickup order. He is officially avoiding law enforcement." My thoughts raced. If Dylan was desperate enough to lie, desperate enough to accuse me, desperate enough to run, what was he planning next? Rowan said, "We have units looking for him. Do not approach him if you see him." I promised I wouldn't, not because I was afraid, but because I knew better than to play hero in a civilian case. Soldiers pick their battles carefully. Minutes stretched into hours. Night crept over Fayetteville like a slow-moving shadow. Around 8 p.m., while I was sitting in my apartment staring at the silent TV screen, my phone rang again. Rowan. "Found him." My spine straightened. "Where?" His voice held equal parts disbelief and fatigue. "At his girlfriend's apartment. We arrested him without incident. But his girlfriend claims he was packing a bag, leaving town, running from what he'd done, running from the truth, running from the lies collapsing under their own weight." I sat back, letting the news settle. So, the second climax had come. Not the gunshot, not the accusation. But this, the moment when Dylan realized he was no longer protected by lies or by the mother who had built her life around shielding him. Rowan continued. He's being booked tonight. False reporting. Assault with a deadly weapon. Unlawful possession of a firearm. Attempted evasion. The charges lined up like bricks. Heavy. Solid. Consequential. And then, Rowan added the final blow. And Captain, your stepmother is under active investigation by both the sheriff's office and the fraud bureau. She may be facing charges too. I exhaled slowly. Not victory, not pride. Just a quiet, steady truth. For years they hid behind manipulation. For years they twisted narratives. For years they siphoned my life, my money, my peace. Now the system had begun untangling their web one thread at a time. And watching it unfold wasn't satisfying, it was sobering. The collapse of a toxic family is not a celebration. It is a revelation. And that night, as Dylan sat in a jail cell and Joanne scrambled for a story that no longer protected her one truth, finally surfaced above everything else. They were never a family I lost. They were a burden I survived. 3 days after Dylan's arrest, Cumberland County Sheriff's Office announced a brief press update regarding the incident. The message was vague enough to make the public curious, but formal enough to signal that something significant had shifted. I didn't plan on attending. Soldiers do not step into public drama, especially when the story involves family. But CPT Green insisted I be present, not at the podium, not giving a statement, but standing quietly in the back, in uniform, a silent reminder that discipline has a face. When I arrived, the small press area outside the sheriff's office had been set up with a podium, a row of microphones, and a portable projection screen. Local news vans were parked along the curb, reporters gathering like a flock sensing a storm. I stayed near the doorway. Posture, straight hands behind my back, blending into the background, the way military training teaches you to do when you're not the one meant to speak. A deputy wheeled out a small monitor and set up a laptop beside it. That alone told me what was coming. Evidence was about to breathe in public. When Sheriff Dalton stepped to the podium, the chatter faded into a hush. He adjusted the microphone and began with the smooth, steady tone of a man used to bad news and good news in equal measure. On the evening of October 12th, an incident involving a firearm occurred at a private residence in Fayetteville. Initial statements provided by individuals involved were conflicting. For a moment, I felt that old tension crawl up my spine. Conflicting statements, the phrase that had almost buried me. But then everything changed. Sheriff Dalton continued. Thanks to video provided by a neighbor's security system, we have confirmed that the shot fired was the result of a self-defense maneuver carried out by Captain Avery Lockwood of Fort Liberty. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My name wasn't new to the detectives or the county officials, but to the public it was the first time the story had a protagonist with a uniform. The sheriff lifted a hand. Out of respect for privacy and military regulation, Captain Lockwood's face will be blurred in the footage. Then he nodded to the deputy standing by the monitor. The screen flickered, and there it was. The grainy backyard video the moment Dylan grabbed me, the way he shoved the barrel to my forehead, the way my posture didn't flinch, even as his hand trembled with drunken fury. Reporters leaned forward. Someone gasped. When the gun fired, the crowd lurched as one. I watched the screen the way someone watches a past self from another lifetime. The blur of my movement, the red spray from Dylan's arm, the collapse. It was all there. Not rumor, not accusation, not the twisted version Joanne had tried to create. The truth. When the clip ended, silence hovered for a long second before the sheriff spoke again. After reviewing the evidence, we have determined that Captain Lockwood acted within the full scope of state law regarding self-defense. The suspect Dylan Lockwood is facing multiple charges including assault with a deadly weapon, unlawful possession of a firearm, and providing false statements to investigators. He paused, letting the weight of those words fall. Additionally, the sheriff's office is cooperating with the State Fraud Bureau regarding financial reports connected to Mrs. Joanne Lockwood. That was the moment the air changed. The press, the onlookers, even the deputies seemed to straighten with a new kind of alertness. Injustice is one thing. But conspiracy wrapped inside family betrayal, Americans do not forgive that easily. A reporter raised her hand. Sheriff, is it true the family attempted to blame the gunshot on the victim? Dalton nodded grimly. Correct. False accusations were made during the early stages of the investigation. Without the security footage, those claims could have severely hindered our ability to reach the truth. Another reporter shouted, "Captain Lockwood is a military officer. Was she targeted because of her rank?" The sheriff didn't answer that directly, but his tone made the truth obvious. She was targeted because she is the responsible one, and because sometimes the people closest to us abuse our silence. That line landed hard. You could feel the entire crowd absorb it. The moment the sheriff stepped away from the podium, the reporters erupted, lining the internet with headlines within minutes. The comments were immediate and fiery. What kind of man points a gun at his sister's head? That stepbrother is a disgrace. That soldier didn't flinch. She's tougher than all of them combined. Her own family tried to bury her. Thank God for that camera. The story hit social media like gasoline on open flame. Within hours, local veteran groups were sharing it. Military spouses networks spread it further. Even a Marine Corps Facebook group picked it up, calling Mr. Harris a hero for submitting the footage. But the ripple effect did not stop online. Joanne's neighborhood saw the press conference too, and in a place like Fayetteville, where half the residents have ties to Fort Liberty, loyalty carries weight. Neighbors who used to wave at her stopped. Cars pulled into driveways without eye contact. Conversations quieted when she stepped outside. One woman who had attended church with her for years reportedly walked right past her in the grocery store as if she were invisible. Public humiliation isn't just loud. Sometimes it's quiet, isolating. I didn't witness it directly, but I heard it from multiple people, including Mr. Harris, who called later that evening with a simple update. "Folks aren't buying her act anymore, kid." And frankly, they shouldn't. When I thanked him, he huffed, "Don't thank me. Thank the truth." Standing in my living room after the press conference, the sun slipping through the blinds in thin gold streaks, I processed everything slowly. This wasn't victory. This wasn't revenge. This was exposure. The exact moment when the world finally saw what I had lived with for years. And yet, even with the internet roaring on my behalf, I felt no triumph. Only an even quiet breath. A release of weight I had carried so long I didn't realize how heavy it had become. The world no longer believed their lies. The world saw the truth. And for the first time in my life, so did they. The morning after the press conference, Fort Liberty felt different. Soldiers always talked about how a base has its own weather system, its own mood. But that day, the air felt sharper, cleaner, almost expectant. I went through my routine like any other morning: formation equipment checks, 2 brief meetings about supply chain routing. No one treated me differently, but I felt the shift in the smallest ways. A specialist who usually avoided eye contact gave me a respectful nod. A sergeant from another company held the door a little longer than usual. People had seen the video, and more importantly, they had seen the truth. By noon, I believed the worst was behind me. The legal storm would continue, but the danger, the fear, the lies, they no longer had power in the dark. That illusion lasted exactly 3 more hours. At 1500, my phone buzzed with a message from the military police stationed at the All-American Gate. It was short, but pointed. "Captain Lockwood, there is a civilian woman at the gate requesting to see you. She is distressed and claiming to be your family. We will not grant access without your approval." My stomach tightened before my mind caught up. Distressed woman. Family. Only one person would show up at a military installation uninvited while her world burned around her. Joanne. I stood there in my office, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, feeling the old familiar pressure build at the base of my skull, the pressure I used to feel as a teenager whenever Joanne cornered me in the kitchen or questioned my decisions or hinted that I owed her something. But this time, the pressure didn't control me. It clarified me. I typed back, "I will come to the gate. Do not let her in." The drive to the front gate was short, but each turn felt heavier than a convoy route. As I approached, I saw the cluster of MPs standing firm behind the barricades, and beyond them, Joanne. Even from a distance, I recognized the frantic motion of her arms, the trembling desperation in her stance. Her hair was unkempt, her makeup smeared, sleeves wrinkled like she had pulled on the first coat she found before rushing out the door. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had simply grown. When I parked and stepped out of my truck, the MPs straightened. One of them, a staff sergeant, approached me quietly. Ma'am, she tried to push past the first checkpoint. She's been crying and shouting your name for about 15 minutes. We kept her contained. I nodded. Thank you, Sergeant. I've got it from here. They didn't step aside, but they parted just enough for me to walk up to the outer fence, the one meant to keep threats out and soldiers safe. There was something symbolic about it today. Joanne spotted me instantly and rushed forward, gripping the metal bars like a prisoner begging for release. Avery, honey, please, please, I need to talk to you. Her voice cracked into jagged pieces. It sounded like she had swallowed gravel. I stopped 3 feet from the fence, keeping my posture straight, my shoulders still, my eyes level. The MPs remained close but respectfully silent. Joanne stretched her fingers through the bars as if reaching for me, but I didn't move. Avery, she sobbed. They're saying terrible things about your stepbrother, about me. You know we're not bad people. You know I raised you, didn't I? Raised. The word hit me like ice. She had fed me, housed me, controlled me, guilt-tripped me, manipulated me, used me, but raised me. No, the army raised me. My father raised me. She merely managed me for her own benefit. I stayed silent long enough that she became frantic, voice rising in pitch. Avery, please, they're charging Dylan with things he doesn't deserve. He needs you. He's scared. You know he loves you. He was just, stop. It was one word spoken quietly, but it cut through everything. She froze, tears clinging to her lashes. You came here, I said, each syllable even and controlled, to ask me to save the man who pointed a loaded gun at my head. She shook her head violently. It was a mistake. He wasn't thinking. He's still your brother. I let out a slow breath. He is not my brother. She inhaled sharply, her shoulders caving in. Avery, please, sweetheart, you don't mean that. We're family. Families forgive. Families protect, I corrected. Families tell the truth. Families don't lie to law enforcement to bury the only person who kept her composure while their son held a gun to her forehead. She flinched as if I had slapped her. I didn't know what I was saying. I was scared. You were calculating, I replied calmly. You thought if you blamed me and defended him hard enough, the sheriff's office would believe your story. You thought my silence could be used against me again. Her chin trembled. Avery, I'm begging you. Please. They're treating us like criminals. People won't talk to me. Our neighbors, they act like I'm poison. I can't go anywhere. Everyone saw that video. Her voice cracked. Everyone thinks I'm a monster. I studied her for a long moment, not with anger, not with pity, with clarity. You did that, I said. Not the video. Not the sheriff. You. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked around desperately as if the MPs or the traffic or the sky itself might come to her rescue. Then her gaze snapped back to me. Avery, honey, please don't give up on us. I stepped closer, my face inches from the fence, the metal cool between us. She leaned forward instinctively, thinking I was softening, thinking tears could still steer me like a ship. But I had never been clearer. Joanne, I said, voice absolutely steady, you are not my family. She choked on a sob. The MPs shifted slightly behind me, but I raised a hand to signal I was fine. Go home, I said. Do not come to this base again. She shook her head over and over as if denial itself could reverse the truth. Please, she whispered. Please, Avery. No, I answered. Not anymore. She sank to her knees in front of the gate, hands still gripping the metal forehead pressed to the cold bars. One of the MPs stepped forward gently. Ma'am, you'll need to leave. Her fingers slipped from the fence. She looked up at me one last time, face streaked with tears, expression shattered. And in that moment, I felt nothing. No guilt, no fear, no obligation. Just release. A clean, steady, absolute release. As she was escorted back to the parking lot, I turned away, not in cruelty, but in closure. There is a difference. Behind me, a staff sergeant spoke quietly. Ma'am, are you okay? I nodded once. Yes, Sergeant. I'm perfect. And as I walked back toward my truck, the wind lifted across the parade field, carrying away the last pieces of a story I no longer belonged to. 3 days after Joanne's scene at the Fort Liberty gate, the world around me had begun to settle into a steady rhythm again. My duties returned to normal. My commander treated me exactly the same, fair, firm, and without pity. Soldiers who had seen the press conference gave quiet nods of respect, the kind that say, "We saw what you survived," without prying into details. For the first time in weeks, my evenings weren't filled with dread or adrenaline. They were quiet, peaceful, predictable. That peace lasted until one Wednesday morning when I opened my company mailbox and saw an envelope that nearly stopped my breath. The handwriting on the front was messy, uneven, and unmistakable. Dylan. The return address listed the Cumberland County Detention Center. The moment my eyes hit the name, that familiar heaviness settled between my ribs. Not fear, not anger. Just a cold recognition that some storms refuse to die, even after lightning has already struck. I walked the envelope back to my office, shut the door behind me, and sat down at my desk. The envelope felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. A weight made entirely of history and consequences. For several seconds, I just held it between my fingers, not opening it, not rejecting it, simply acknowledging that the boy who once shoved me in the hallway for fun, who once stole my father's watch and blamed me, who once sneered whenever Dad praised my grades, had now written me a letter from jail. I finally slid my thumb under the flap and opened it. The paper inside was lined torn from a cheap notebook. The handwriting was frantic, the ink smudged in places as if written by someone whose hands trembled. "Avery, please. Please read all of this before you decide anything." My jaw tightened. I kept reading. "I know things look bad. I know what happened. I know what the video shows. But it wasn't supposed to be like that. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I didn't mean to scare you. I wasn't thinking straight. You know how I get when I drink. You know I wasn't trying to hurt you." "Not really." I blinked once slowly. Not trying to hurt me. He had pressed a loaded gun to my forehead. He had screamed in my face for staying calm. He had tightened his grip when I didn't flinch. Not trying to hurt me. But the letter continued. "They're saying I could get real time for this. Serious time. You're the only one who can help. If you tell them you don't want to press charges, if you tell them it was an accident, they might go easier. I'm begging you, Avery. I'm begging you like family. You're the only one who can save me. I swear I'll change everything. I'll go to rehab. I'll get a job. I'll stop drinking. I'll treat you better. I'll apologize in court if you want. Just please, please help me. I'm scared, and Mom is falling apart. We need you. I need you. Please don't let me go to prison. Please don't turn your back on me. Please." The letter ended with a shaky signature. "Dylan." I sat there for a long moment, the paper resting on my knees, the words burning into the quiet of my office. If someone had walked in, they would have seen the stillness of my body and mistaken it for calm. But inside, something colder and sharper than any blade was slicing through the last strands of sympathy I might have once had. This was not remorse. This was desperation. This was not accountability. This was survival instinct, the kind that only wakes up when a man realizes the world no longer bends around his misbehavior. For years, Dylan had never once apologized for anything. Not when he broke Dad's tools. Not when he stole money from Joanne's purse. Not when he threw my deployment medals across the room during an argument saying, "You think these mean anything?" Not once. His apologies came only now, when consequences were finally real, when accountability had finally stepped out of the shadows. And he wasn't asking for forgiveness, he was asking for rescue. The paper trembled slightly, not from my hands shaking, but from the breath I exhaled after holding it too long. I read the letter again slowly this time, examining every line, every excuse, every plea disguised as affection. "You're the only one who can save me. I wasn't trying to hurt you. We need you. Please don't let me go to prison." Each line revealed the same truth: he did not care about me. He cared only that he had run out of people left to manipulate. And now in his mind, I was the last rope dangling above the pit he had dug for himself. I folded the letter neatly the way you would fold a flag or a formal memo and placed it back on my desk. Then I stared at it for a long moment. I thought of the gun, the cold barrel, the bang, the spray of blood, the lies he told, the way he tried to bury me to save himself, the way Joanne had screamed at deputies demanding they blame me, the way Dylan had smirked through so many years of my silence. I thought of all of it, and then I realized something with a clarity that settled my pulse into calm, even beats. This wasn't a plea. It was a pattern. One last attempt at the manipulation he had been raised on. One last performance hoping guilt would save him. One last grasp for a sister he had never treated as family, not once. My decision took exactly 1 second. I picked up the letter. I tore it straight down the middle. The sound was soft but final. I tore it again and again until the pieces were no larger than scraps fluttering between my fingers. Then I dropped them into the small trash bin beside my desk. The pieces fell like dead leaves. No drama, no hesitation, no regret. A silent rejection. The kind that spoke louder than any shouting match ever could. When I stood up and walked out of my office, I felt lighter. Not victorious, just free. It was the kind of freedom soldiers feel when a mission ends, when the weight they've carried for too many miles finally slips off their shoulders. The world outside was quiet, clear. Sunlight poured across the motor pool in wide golden sheets, and for the first time since that gun touched my skin, I knew the truth without question. I didn't owe Dylan forgiveness. I didn't owe him protection. I didn't owe him a single breath. He had pointed a gun at me. He had chosen lies. He had chosen betrayal. And now he would face consequences without my interference, without my voice, without my rescue. As I walked across the concrete toward the parking lot, I didn't look back. Some endings don't require closure. Some endings simply require silence. The morning after I tore Dylan's letter into pieces, the air on Fort Liberty felt sharper, clearer, almost as if the entire installation exhaled with me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't wake with tension coiled behind my ribs. I didn't rehearse statements or anticipate accusations. The silence around me felt different now. It wasn't the silence of waiting for the next blow. It was the silence that follows a door finally closing. I headed to battalion headquarters for a routine logistics briefing, expecting nothing unusual. But the moment I stepped inside, my commander, Captain Mariah Green, caught sight of me and gave a short nod toward her office. It wasn't urgent, but it wasn't casual either. I followed her in, shut the door, and stood at ease. She didn't waste time. "CID called me this morning," she said, leaning back in her chair. And so did the county DA. My pulse remained steady. She wasn't watching me with concern. She was watching me the way commanders look at soldiers who have walked through fire and come out hardened instead of burned. "Everything is moving forward," she continued. "And it's moving fast." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She lifted a folder from her desk, tapped it once with her finger. "Dylan has been formally charged with assault with a deadly weapon. Given the video evidence and his prior record, the DA isn't entertaining any plea deals. They're preparing for sentencing." A quiet breath left my chest. Not relief, just acknowledgement. The inevitable had finally begun. "Joanne," I asked. Green's expression tightened, but only slightly. "The county is opening a separate investigation. Fraud, misappropriation of insurance funds, falsifying beneficiary statements. They already pulled your father's policy records. The numbers don't lie." I stared down at my hands. The knuckles were still slightly scraped from the struggle in the backyard, small reminders of a night that felt both distant and close enough to touch. Green spoke again, her voice low but certain. "You don't need to give any more statements. CID confirmed your actions were within the limits of lawful self-defense. You're cleared under UCMJ. This is out of your hands now." I nodded slowly. "Out of my hands. For years, I thought justice was something you had to chase, fight for, bleed for. But now it was something unfolding on its own. Not because of me, but because truth finally had the space to breathe." Green leaned forward. "I'm proud of how you handled yourself. You've shown extraordinary restraint." A small, faint smile touched her lips. Restraint most people wouldn't have had. I thanked her, left her office and walked outside into the crisp afternoon air. Soldiers passed by, laughing, talking. hurrying between buildings. The world kept moving. My world kept settling. And for the first time, I realized what real revenge felt like. It wasn't fury. It wasn't confrontation. It was standing still while consequences came for the people who never thought they'd face any. Later that afternoon, CID called me directly. Agent Morales spoke professionally, but with a note of something that almost sounded like respect. "Captain Lockwood, just updating you as promised," he said. "We've completed interviews with all involved parties. The evidence is overwhelming. The DA has everything they need." "Understood," I replied. "Is there anything else you need from me?" "No, ma'am. Your cooperation and your sworn statement were thorough. You handled this exactly how a trained soldier should." That line sank deeper than he probably intended. Exactly how a trained soldier should. Not aggressive, not vengeful. Just aligned with procedure, aligned with truth. Morales continued, "For what it's worth, most cases like this get messy. Yours was clean. Very clean. The camera footage was decisive. And your restraint, you'd be surprised how rare that is." When the call ended, I sat in my car for several minutes, letting the reality settle in. Dylan wasn't going to twist the truth this time. Joanne wasn't going to control the narrative. No one was going to yell louder than the evidence. Justice didn't need me to swing a fist. It didn't need me to shout. It didn't need me to convince anyone. All it needed was time. Time for the system to do what I had always been taught to trust. Days passed, each one quieter than the last. On Friday, I received an email from the county DA's office. Formal charges filed. Court date set. Victim testimony optional due to video evidence and sworn statements already provided. Optional. That word held weight. For the first time in my life, I wasn't required to defend myself. The truth already had. Later that evening, as I ate dinner in my small off-post apartment, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail. Unknown number. I pressed play, expecting maybe a telemarketer or a missed work call. Instead, I heard the shaking voice of Joanne. Not crying, not raging. Something else entirely. Something hollow. "Avery, I know you won't answer me. I know you won't listen. But please, please, can't you tell them he didn't mean it? He's my son. He's all I have left. He's scared. I'm scared. Please." Her breath hitched. "They said he might really go to prison this time. They said I might face charges, too. I didn't know things would go this far. I didn't mean for all of this to happen." Another pause. A long one. Then, in a trembling whisper, "You could fix this. You know you could. Why won't you?" The message ended. I set the phone down on the table. I didn't replay it. I didn't analyze it. I didn't even feel the need to delete it. Joanne's words felt like echoes of a life I no longer lived. A life where I was responsible for everyone's emotions except my own. Where my silence was currency they spent freely. Where their chaos demanded my stability. But not anymore. The next morning, CID notified me that Dylan had failed his preliminary behavioral evaluation and would remain in custody until sentencing. Joanne's financial records had been officially subpoenaed. The no-contact order I filed had been approved. And with every procedural update, every formal step, every signature from courts and investigators, justice unfolded the way only real justice can. Calmly, methodically, without theatrics, without my hands anywhere near the steering wheel. That was the revenge, not screaming at them, not humiliating them, not plotting anything. Simply standing still while they were forced to face the consequences of the choices they made. Choices they thought they were too clever, too loud, or too connected to ever pay for. I sat outside my apartment that evening watching the sun melt across the tree line. The air was warm, my shoulders were loose, my pulse steady, and I realized something that lodged deep in my chest with unshakable clarity. I didn't need to get even. I didn't need to destroy them. They had destroyed themselves. The truth did the work. The law did the work. All I had to do was refuse to save them from the fallout they created. That was the smartest revenge I had ever delivered. And I didn't lift a single finger. When the sentencing finally came, it happened on a Wednesday morning so ordinary it almost felt wrong. The sky over Cumberland County stretched pale and quiet. The streets were barely busy. The world didn't know a chapter of my life was closing. It didn't need to. The courtroom itself was smaller than I expected, lined with wooden benches that creaked any time someone shifted their weight. I wasn't required to attend. The DA made that clear. The video alone carried the whole case. But I went anyway. Not out of revenge, not out of satisfaction, out of closure. Quiet closure. Dylan entered in a beige county jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, eyes down. The cocky lift of his chin was gone, replaced with a slumped uncertainty that didn't fit the man who once pressed a gun to my head. Joanne sat in the back wearing a faded cardigan, her hair twisted into a messy bun that looked like she had done it in a hurry or with shaking hands. When she saw me walk in, her breath hitched just loud enough for me to hear. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She just stared with hollow eyes, her entire world collapsing around her, and still somehow convinced I was the one who kicked out the foundation. The judge read the charges calmly without drama. Assault with a deadly weapon, illegal possession of a firearm, filing a false report, endangering another person. The words echoed gently through the courtroom, striking harder with each repetition. When the judge asked if Dylan wanted to speak, he didn't look at me. He just kept his gaze glued to the table. "I messed up," he said, voice thin. I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean for everything to go this far. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Not once did he say my name. Not once did he acknowledge the gun, or the lies, or the years that led to that moment in the backyard. The judge watched him with an unreadable expression. Then came the sentence. 18 months incarceration, followed by 3 years probation, mandatory alcohol treatment, no contact order with the victim. There was no gasp, no courtroom shock, just the soft scratch of the clerk's pen and the quiet folding of a life built on entitlement finally meeting immovable consequences. Joanne covered her mouth with her hands. Her shoulders shook. But she didn't look at me. Not once. After court adjourned, I walked out without speaking to either of them. Closure didn't need words. It just needed distance. Over the next few weeks, the fallout arrived like slow-moving dominoes. The investigation into Joanne's finances accelerated. The insurance company dug into the irregularities surrounding my father's policy. I hadn't known the extent of the fraud until the detective explained it plainly. She had manipulated beneficiary documents, redirected funds, and concealed several withdrawals she had no legal right to make. It wasn't a minor mistake. It was deliberate, repeated, criminal. And once the sheriff's office moved forward, her world crumbled fast. She lost her job, then her credit, then the house, the same house she used to lord over me, insisting I owed her for raising me. When the foreclosure notice hit, she left me 6 voicemails in 3 days, none of which I listened to. Guilt is a powerful force, but it wasn't mine to carry anymore. By midwinter, she was living in a small rental outside Spring Lake, far from the polished neighborhood she once bragged about endlessly to anyone who would listen. And Dylan, jail changed him. Not in the dramatic way people imagine. Not in a moral awakening way. More like a sobering realization that the world he treated like his personal cushion finally stopped absorbing the blows. I received updates from the DA's office every month. His behavior was compliant, not good, not bad, just compliant. Gray, flat, like a flame that finally ran out of oxygen. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't cheer when the house went into foreclosure. I didn't smile when the sentencing paperwork came through. I didn't feel victory when Joanne's charges escalated. The truth is simpler. I felt sad in a tired way. Sad for the girl I used to be, who kept hoping they would change. Sad for the father who had believed he could blend 2 broken families into one. Sad for Dylan, not because he didn't deserve consequences, but because he had been handed every chance in life and chose violence anyway. But sadness didn't break me. Not this time. It washed through me the way waves wash over rocks. It shaped me, but it didn't crack anything. I handled it the same way I handled everything else in my life, with steady breath and the discipline I learned long before October 2024 exploded beneath my feet. Back on base, life found its rhythm again. Formation runs at dawn. Meetings with my logistics team. Quick lunches at the DFAC. Laughing at inside jokes that only make sense when you've served long enough to appreciate the strange humor soldiers develop under pressure. I didn't isolate. I didn't crumble. I moved. Forward, quietly, one step at a time. My therapy appointments at Womack helped more than I expected. Talking about the years before Dylan pulled the trigger forced me to confront truths I'd ignored for too long. That the gun wasn't the first act of violence, it was the culmination of a lifetime of small, sharp cuts. That loyalty had blinded me. That silence had protected the wrong people. That survival sometimes means walking away instead of holding on. And slowly, in that steady military hospital room with its sterile walls and quiet hum, I rebuilt parts of myself I hadn't realized were broken. On evenings when the base quieted down, I walked my new German Shepherd Nova through the housing loop. She trotted beside me with the alert confidence of a dog who understood command, discipline, and family in ways some humans never learn. Those walks were the first time I felt something like peace since October. Real peace. Not the brittle kind that shatters under demand. A calm earned, not granted. Sometimes I would stop near the edge of the parade field, watch the sunset bleed across the tree line, and think about how strange it was that justice looked nothing like I expected. I thought it would feel triumphant, explosive, satisfying. Instead, it felt quiet, heavy, mature. It wasn't fire, it was gravity, pulling everything unnatural back to where it belonged. Dylan was exactly where he needed to be. Joanne was facing consequences she had avoided for years, and I was standing again. Not unscarred, but stronger, sharper, defined. In the end, the fallout didn't destroy me. It freed me. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes that whisper is the thing that saves you. Womack Army Medical Center has a particular quiet in the early mornings, a kind of hush that settles over the hallways before the day begins its steady rhythm of appointments and briefings and emergency calls. I walked through those halls the first week after the sentencing, feeling like I was stepping into a different world. No shouting, no accusations, no weapon flashing under backyard lights. Just the low hum of fluorescent bulbs and the steady echo of boots on clean floors. I checked in at behavioral health the same way I would check in for a physical or vaccination. That is how the Army trains you. Treat mental health with the same matter-of-fact responsibility as any other part of readiness. But this appointment carried a different heaviness, the kind that sits behind your ribs, not because you are afraid, but because you have been carrying something so long you do not remember what it feels like to set it down. When the nurse called my name, I followed her to Major Erica Dalton's office. M.A.J. Dalton had a calm presence that was almost disarming. No cold clinical distance, no exaggerated empathy. Just steady grounded professionalism. Her office was simple. 2 chairs, a desk, a window that let in soft morning light. She closed the door, then motioned for me to sit. Avery. I read your case file, she said, her voice gentle but steady. I read the reports. I watched the video, and I want to start by saying I am glad you are here. I nodded. Not sure what to do with my hands, so I folded them in my lap. It still felt strange to be in a room where no one expected me to defend myself or justify my choices. She studied me for a moment, assessing, not judging. Tell me what your body feels right now, she asked. The question startled me. My body, I echoed. Yes. Tension, weight, pain, anything. I took a slow breath, paying attention for the first time in weeks. My shoulders feel tight. My chest feels heavy. And my jaw, I noticed, is clenched. She nodded. That is your body remembering danger. Trauma is stored in the body first, before the mind tries to make sense of it. We will work through both. I swallowed the words, settling in deeper than I expected. For years, I had treated stress like something to outrun, a mission to complete, a challenge to outdiscipline. But sitting there, I could feel how exhaustion had settled into my bones like sediment. She leaned forward slightly, hands relaxed in her lap. Tell me what part of all this keeps replaying in your mind. I hesitated, then the image rose instantly, sharp and cold. The gun, the metal against my skin, the breath Dylan took right before the gun went off. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I replay the moment he raised the gun, and the moment no one stepped in. Not even Joanne, not even someone who claimed to be family. Dalton nodded slowly like nothing I said surprised her. "That is betrayal trauma," she said. "It cuts deeper than violence itself. When danger comes from someone who should protect you, the wound hits a different part of the mind, a quieter part, a deeper part." I looked down at my hands again. After a moment, she asked, "What do you think was the hardest part of that night, not counting the gunfire?" I knew the answer instantly. When Joanne blamed me. When she screamed at the deputies. When she acted like my existence was the problem and not her son holding a weapon. That broke something in me. Saying it aloud made my chest loosen in a way I hadn't realized was possible. Dalton wrote a small note, then said, "You learned that night that biology does not guarantee safety, and love does not guarantee loyalty. But here is the part you may not see yet. You survived because you trusted your instincts, not theirs. That instinct kept you alive. It will also help you heal." Something inside me softened. A knot I had held for years, maybe decades. For the first 30 minutes, we talked about the background, the pattern, the slow erosion that started long before the gun, the childhood expectations, the way Joanne shaped the house around Dylan, the disappearance of everything stable after my father died. Dalton listened the way soldiers listen on long ruck marches without interrupting, without filling quiet with meaningless reassurances. When she finally spoke again, her voice held the same steady tone. "You have carried 2 battles at once, Avery. The external threat of violence and the internal ache of being unseen and unprotected by those who should have valued you." She paused, letting the words settle. "One of those battles is over. The other needs time." That was the first session. At the end, she said something that stayed with me for weeks. "Healing is not a reward for surviving. It is the work you deserve afterward." That line echoed in my head on the drive home. It echoed the next morning at PT. It echoed when Nova rested her head on my knee as I sat on the couch, replaying everything I had said. I returned for the second session 1 week later. This time my shoulders were not as tight. My jaw did not ache from clenching. Dalton nodded approvingly, as if she could see every micro change. "Good. Sit, breathe. Let us go deeper today." She guided me through grounding exercises, placing my feet flat on the floor, naming things in the room, observing my breathing. It felt strange at first, almost embarrassingly simple. But with each minute, something inside began to loosen. When she asked me to talk about the years before the gun, the years where the wounds were quieter, I felt something crack open. Joanne's cutting comments, Dylan's entitlement, the constant pressure to be useful, to be quiet, to not disturb the fragile peace in a house built on uneven ground. She nodded slowly. "This is where we start healing not the gunshot, but the silent injuries that came long before it. Tell me." She said, "How did you learn to be small in a house where you were the strongest one?" The question hit deeper than I wanted to admit. I lowered my eyes and answered softly. "I learned to survive by not needing anything." Dalton wrote something, then looked up. "And now you need to unlearn that, because needing nothing is not strength. It is a wound that pretends to be armor." We spent the next hour dismantling patterns I had mistaken for discipline. How I apologized without realizing it. How I stayed silent to keep peace that was not mine to maintain. How I mistook endurance for love and responsibility for obligation. By the end, tears pricked unexpectedly behind my eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. A strange, quiet relief that felt like stepping out of a burning building and realizing the air is safe again. By the third session, Dalton shifted the focus. "Boundaries," she said. "Not walls. Boundaries. They protect what matters. They do not shut out the world." She made me repeat sentences out loud, sentences that felt unnatural but necessary. "I do not owe access to people who hurt me. I am allowed to protect my peace. I choose who enters my life. I choose who stays." Saying them out loud felt powerful, like reclaiming parts of myself I had given away piece by piece without noticing. We covered everything: trauma, grief, rediscovering identity, rebuilding trust in myself. And through that entire week, the emotional undulation carried me through waves deep enough to feel, but gentle enough to breathe inside. Not the sharp roller coaster that defined the earlier chapters of my story. This was different. This was healing undulation moving between reflection relief and self-compassion. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the training fields, I walked Nova along the fence line behind the motor pool. The air smelled faintly of dust and pine. Soldiers laughed in the distance. Life moved with a rhythm unchanged by my personal storms. And for the first time, I felt not smaller in the world, but anchored in it, anchored in myself. The past had not vanished. The betrayal still stung. But it no longer defined the shape of my days. It lived behind me, not in front of me. In our final session of the month, Dalton asked me one question. What do you want your life to look like from here? The answer came easily. Quiet. Steady. Mine. She smiled softly. That is healing Avery, not forgetting. Reclaiming. When I left Womack that day, the air outside felt warmer even in the cool Carolina wind. I wasn't done healing, not even close. But I had begun. And beginning was something I had not been allowed to do since childhood. The road ahead wouldn't be perfect, but it would be mine. Finally mine. Moving off post was not dramatic. It was strangely gentle the way a chapter closes with the soft click of a door rather than a slam. After weeks of therapy at Womack and after the legal storms had quieted into a steady, predictable rhythm, I realized something important. I was finally ready to choose a life instead of survive one. The apartment I found sat 10 minutes outside Fort Liberty, tucked behind a row of tall Carolina pines that swayed like slow dancers when the wind rolled in. It was a modest 2-bedroom with a balcony facing west, a place where the sunset spilled directly into the living room. The first time I stepped inside, keys still warm in my hand, I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not triumph, but space. Space I had never allowed myself to claim before. I walked through each room, slowly touching the blank walls, listening to the silence. There was no judgment here, no footsteps waiting for me to fail, no voice demanding I give more than I had. The quiet felt like oxygen. I moved in gradually, carrying boxes in the back of my truck after work, setting up furniture piece by piece, choosing things for comfort instead of function for the first time in my adult life. On the second evening after arranging the couch and the bookshelf, I went to the Fayetteville shelter to meet a German Shepherd listed as 2 years old with a note that said anxious but loyal. When the staff brought her out, she moved cautiously, ears pinned back until our eyes met. Her tail gave one hesitant wag as if she wanted to trust but needed permission to believe it was safe. Her name on the paperwork read Nova. I knelt so she could sniff my hand, and something warm settled in my chest again. This feeling of being seen without expectation. I brought her home that same evening. She circled the apartment curiously, sniffing corners, taking small steps as if checking that this space really belonged to her too. When she finally settled beside the couch with her head on my boot, I realized I had not felt companionship like that in years, maybe ever. We built routines quickly, simple ones, steady ones, wake up before sunrise. Leash clipped, walk down the pine-lined path that wound behind the apartment complex. Nova loved those mornings, her stride purposeful ears, alert tail wagging each time a squirrel darted near the trees. For the first time, I did not feel like I was rushing toward something or recovering from something. I was simply moving, living. After PT at the company, I would return home for lunch, letting Nova out before heading back for afternoon operations briefings. The apartment always greeted me with the same quiet warmth, a stark contrast to the constant tension I had lived in for decades. Peace no longer felt unnatural. It felt deserved. Evenings became my favorite time of day. The sun poured through the balcony door, casting long orange beams across the floor. Sometimes I would sit there with Nova at my feet, watching the light fade behind the pines. Some nights I cooked real meals instead of grabbing something quick from the DFAC. Other nights I read or folded laundry, or simply sat on the floor scratching behind Nova's ears while she pressed her head against my knee. Slow routines, gentle routines. Routines built on wanting, not on obligation. One night, as I watched Nova chew her rope toy, I felt the quiet realization that this was the first home in my life where every object, every corner, every shadow felt safe because I had chosen it. No Joanne, no Dylan, no thick air filled with resentment. Just me and a dog who looked at me like I was her entire world. Therapy continued once a week, and each session peeled away a little more weight. Dalton asked questions that dug deep, but the healing was no longer painful. It was clarifying. We talked about boundaries, about self-trust, about identity. She once asked me, "What is one thing you want to build in this new chapter?" The answer came easier than I expected. "A life I do not have to recover from." She smiled knowingly. "And what does that look like?" "It looks like this," I said, simply thinking of the apartment, the pine trees, Nova, the sunsets, the quiet that no longer felt like waiting for danger. "It looks like not apologizing for taking up space. It looks like not proving anything to people who never valued me. It looks like rest, and maybe joy." Saying the word joy out loud felt almost foreign, as if it belonged to someone else. But Dalton nodded approvingly, like she had been waiting for me to say it. Work became easier too, my focus sharper, my patience deeper. Soldiers in my platoon noticed the change, though they never said it out loud. They just mirrored it, operating with calm steadiness that felt contagious. Captain Green pulled me aside one day after a logistics sync and said quietly, "I am glad you chose to stay near the post. You bring stability to this unit in ways you may not see." Stability. The word echoed later that evening as I sat on the balcony with Nova curled against my leg. Stability was not something I had ever associated with myself. I had always been the one bracing for the next blow, ignoring my own needs, staying silent to keep peace I never received in return. But here in this apartment, with the warm hum of evening traffic in the distance and the soft weight of Nova against my side, I realized I had become stable because I had finally chosen myself. The Army had taught me discipline. Combat had taught me endurance. But rebuilding my life was teaching me something new, something softer. Grace. Not for them. For me. As the weeks passed, small moments stitched themselves into the fabric of my new life, moments I would have overlooked before. Laughing with a sergeant during motor pool checks. Sharing coffee with a civilian worker who told me Nova reminded her of the dog she rescued years ago. Running my hands through Nova's fur every night as she settled beside me with a sigh that sounded like trust. Piece by piece, my world rebuilt itself quietly, without drama, without crisis, without fear. The apartment felt lived in now, not in a messy way, but in a way that felt warm. Framed photos on the shelf, my father's old field jacket hanging by the door. Books stacked neatly, Nova's leash draped over the hook that once felt too empty. I found myself smiling more often, unexpectedly, naturally. One Saturday morning, I woke up to sunlight cutting across the bedroom and Nova nudging my elbow with her nose, and I realized something overwhelming, not painful, overwhelming, but soft, overwhelming. I felt happy. Not loud happiness, not triumphant happiness, just a steady, quiet warmth in my chest. A warmth that said, "You survived. You are safe. You are allowed to rest." Life did not magically become perfect. Healing did not erase the past, but the shadows no longer followed me into every room. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about Dylan or Joanne, but the thoughts no longer carried anger or guilt, just distance. A kind of gentle acceptance that some relationships end not with explosions, but with the simple decision not to return to the pain. In therapy one day, Dalton asked me, "How do you define home now?" I exhaled slowly and answered without hesitation. "Home is anywhere I am not afraid, and anywhere I am allowed to breathe." She nodded her approval. "And does this new home feel like that?" "Yes," I said. "Yes, it does." Rebuilding my life did not require grand gestures or dramatic changes. It required quiet choices, constant choices, choosing peace over chaos, choosing myself over obligation, choosing a life that allowed me to stand straight instead of shrinking. When Nova curled up beside me that night, tail thumping softly in her sleep, and the apartment glowed with lamplight, I realized the truth of it fully. For the first time in my entire life, the light had returned, not because someone brought it to me, not because I earned it through suffering, but because I let it in. And this time, I would keep it. The call came on a Thursday evening just as the sun was sinking behind the pine trees outside my balcony. The sky had turned a warm amber color, casting long shadows across the apartment, while Nova lay sprawled at my feet, snoring softly after our evening walk. Everything felt quiet, still settled, in a way my life had never been before. I was chopping vegetables for dinner when my phone vibrated on the counter. The screen lit up with an unknown number from Cumberland County. For a second, I thought it might be the DA's office with another routine update, but something in my chest tightened, a subtle instinct honed from years of reading danger before it speaks. I answered with a calm, steady voice. "This is Captain Lockwood." Silence filled the line for a moment, shaky, uneven silence like someone trying to gather the courage to speak. Then a voice I hadn't heard in months broke through weak, trembling familiar in a way that hit a deep, old bruise inside me. "Avery." It was Joanne. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Not sharp, not demanding, not covered in the usual layer of entitlement. Just thin, like old paper crumbling under weight. I didn't answer. I didn't offer comfort or recognition. I simply waited. She took a shaky breath. "I know you don't want to hear from me," she said. "I know I have no right to call. I know what I did. I know how it looked, how it hurt you." Her words tumbled out as if rehearsed, but they didn't sound manipulative this time. Not exactly. They sounded like someone standing in the rubble of her own choices, finally seeing the destruction clearly for the first time. I remained silent. Joanne continued, her voice cracking. "I am calling because I don't have anyone else left. Everything is gone. Avery, my house, my savings, my job, my credit. I am losing everything, and I know I earned it, but please, please listen to me before you hang up." I gripped the counter, steadying myself not from shock, but from the sheer weight of hearing her speak without arrogance. It was eerie, almost unreal. She swallowed audibly. "It is Dylan," she said. "He is not doing well inside. He is scared, really scared. And the judge said there is a possibility he could get early release if someone stable is willing to vouch for him. Someone with standing. Someone like you." Her voice trailed off. My pulse did not change. My breathing stayed even, but I felt something cold settle across my shoulders like frost creeping over glass. She pushed on her words, soft, desperate unraveling. "Avery, I know we were not good to you. I know we failed you, but he is my son. He is still my boy, and I am begging you. Please help him. Please talk to the DA. Please consider asking for leniency. I cannot lose him. He cannot survive in there." Her breath trembled against the receiver. "I am his mother," she whispered, "and you are the only one who can save him now." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence stretch between us, not cruelly but with purpose, letting her feel the truth of everything she was asking for, all its weight, all its audacity. Then I spoke. My voice was low, calm, and steady. The same voice I used during the 911 call the night Dylan pulled the gun. The same voice I used giving my statement to CID. The voice that belonged to the version of me who no longer bent for anyone. "Joanne," I said slowly, deliberately, "I am not saving a man who tried to kill me." The silence on the other end ruptured. I heard a soft sound like something breaking inside her, a gasp or a sob, or simply the collision between reality and denial. She whispered a trembling, "Avery, please, he is all I have." For a moment, just one, my mind flickered through the memories the girl I had been. The sacrifices I had made, the nights I had stayed quiet while they took and took and took. Then those thoughts passed like clouds sliding away from the sun, exposing clarity again. I straightened my shoulders and repeated each word clearly. "I do not save people who tried to end my life. That is your answer." She broke. I could hear it not dramatically, not loudly, but in the small choking inhale of someone realizing their final bridge had turned to ash. "Avery," she whispered, "I know we were wrong. I know we hurt you. I know we failed. But I am begging you as a mother. Please. He is my child. You cannot understand what this feels like." I let the weight of her words hang for a long moment, and when I finally answered, my voice came from a place of truth carved clean and precise. "You are right, Joanne. I cannot understand. Because the night your son pointed a gun at my head, you stood behind him and chose him. You chose violence. You chose lies. You chose to sacrifice me to keep him out of trouble. You chose who mattered, and it was not me." She sobbed quietly, the sound of a woman cornered by consequences she once believed would never touch her. I continued, my voice still level. "So now I choose. I choose peace. I choose boundaries. I choose safety. I choose myself, not him, not you." She tried to inhale, but it came out ragged. "Avery, please, he did not mean it. He was drunk. He was upset. He made a mistake. He needs help. He needs family." Family. The word tasted different now, hollow, stripped of the weight it used to carry. I answered simply. "He stopped being family the moment he raised that gun. And you stopped being family the moment you defended him." There was nothing left to say. But I gave her the final line, not with hatred, not with anger, but with a calm finality so absolute it left no room for misinterpretation. "I will not save the man who tried to kill me." On the other end of the call, Joanne let out a sound that was not a scream, not a sob, but a collapse. A recognition that the last lifeline she hoped to grab had disappeared. She whispered something too soft to understand, then the call ended not with a click, but with a quiet surrender. I set my phone on the counter and exhaled slowly. Nova lifted her head, sensing the shift nuzzling my leg. I placed a hand on her back, steadying myself, grounding myself in the present, in the life I had built, far from the chaos of the past. I walked to the balcony, sliding the door open. Evening air brushed against my skin, warm and calm, the sky streaked with pink and gold. For the first time, I felt not vindication, but release. A release so deep it felt like something inside me finally unclenched after years of holding on too tightly. That call had not reopened wounds. It had closed them, cleanly, permanently. Justice was complete, not because Dylan was in jail, not because Joanne was unraveling, but because I finally stepped out of the role they tried to trap me in. I was no longer their scapegoat, no longer their caregiver, no longer their fallback plan. I had chosen myself fully without apology, and in that moment, with the soft evening breeze against my face and Nova leaning into my leg, I realized something with crystal clarity. This was not revenge. This was freedom. In the weeks following Joanne's final call, the world settled into a rhythm so gentle that at first I did not know what to do with it. My life had never been quiet, not truly. Even in the army, even in deployment zones, surrounded by noise and orders and constant movement, there was always a tension humming under my skin, the sense that something at home was waiting to unravel the moment I returned. For the first time, that hum was gone. The silence that replaced it was not hollow. It was peaceful, earned, mine. I began waking up before sunrise without dread pressing on my chest. Nova learned the sound of my alarm and would hop off her bed with a soft thud tail wagging softly as though reminding me this new chapter belonged to both of us. The morning air outside my apartment was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine and earth. As we walked down the quiet path behind the building, I would sometimes catch myself looking toward the horizon, simply breathing without bracing. That alone felt like a kind of rebirth. At work, nothing spectacular changed, but everything felt different. My team moved with a steadiness that reflected our shared understanding of trust and reliability. Captain Green checked on me from time to time, but her check-ins were no longer heavy with concern. They were the brief, easy exchanges between soldiers who had survived storms and understood the meaning of standing firm. After work, I would return to my small apartment with its warm lamps and soft shadows, and Nova would greet me at the door as if I had been gone for a week instead of 9 hours. I made dinner slowly, savoring the simple process of chopping vegetables, listening to soft music, letting the rhythms of everyday life become something comforting rather than something I rushed through. Healing had become less of an event and more of a ritual, a quiet, consistent choosing of peace over chaos. Some nights I would sit on the balcony and watch the sunset dip behind the tree line, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. The breeze would whisper through the pine branches, and I would rest my hand on Nova's fur, absorbing the warmth of her steady presence. It was during these quiet evenings that reflection came without invitation. Not sharp, painful reflection, but gentle, measured understanding. I began thinking about the word family, a word that had shaped so much of my identity in ways I never questioned. Growing up, I believed family was something you held onto no matter how heavy it became. I believed loyalty was a one-way road, one where you walked until your legs shook without expecting anyone to walk beside you. But the events of October, the gun, the lies, the betrayal shattered those beliefs in a way therapy helped me understand. Loyalty without reciprocity was not loyalty. It was captivity. Love without safety was not love. It was obligation wrapped in hope. And surviving on crumbs was not resilience. It was self-abandonment. As the days turned to weeks and the weight of my past loosened its grip, I began to see my family for what they were. Human, complicated, flawed, shaped by their own narratives long before I arrived in their lives. Joanne was a woman ruled by fear, fear of losing control, fear of losing comfort, fear of being alone. Dylan was a product of indulgence, a man raised to believe consequences belonged to other people. And I was the child who stepped into a broken house, believing I could hold everyone together if I simply sacrificed enough. I no longer hated them. Strangely, anger was one of the first emotions that dissolved. What remained was a soft kind of mourning for the father who tried to build a family from fractured pieces, mourning for the girl who believed she could earn love by giving more than she had, mourning for the years I spent apologizing for taking up space. But mourning is not the same as longing. I did not want them back. I did not want to rewrite the past. I simply wanted the understanding to settle in my bones so I could release it with honesty and move forward without carrying their shadows. One Saturday morning, I took Nova on a longer walk following the worn trail that looped around the lake behind the complex. The sunlight shimmered on the surface of the water, and Nova trotted beside me with a lightness that matched my own. As we reached a wooden bench overlooking the water, I sat down and let the breeze brush against my face. I thought about everything that had happened: the shot, the ambulance, the courtroom, the therapy, the rebuilding. I let the memories surface without flinching. They no longer felt like open wounds. They felt like chapters read, unfolded, understood, and closed. A soft calm filled me as I watched the ripples on the lake. Healing was not linear. Some days were heavier than others. Sometimes a sound or a memory pulled me backward for a moment, but I always found my footing again. Not because I forced myself to be strong, but because I finally allowed myself to be human. I rested my hand on Nova's head, and she leaned into the touch with a soft sigh. "You and me, kid," I whispered. She lifted her head as if she understood. In that stillness, I realized something simple but profound. Family was not the people who shared your last name or your bloodline. Family was the people who made you feel safe, the people who respected boundaries, the people who showed up without expecting you to shrink, the people who saw you not as a resource but as a human being worthy of love and dignity. The Army had given me that kind of family more than my home ever did. Friends who stood by me, leaders who protected me, colleagues who respected me, and Nova, a creature who asked for nothing but companionship and returned every ounce of it tenfold. When I returned to the apartment that afternoon, sunlight filled the living room in soft golden sheets. I opened the balcony door, letting the warm air drift inside. I looked around at the space, the plants on the windowsill, the photos on the shelf, the quiet stillness that felt like peace rather than emptiness. This was the first home where I existed without fear, the first life I built for myself by myself. I exhaled slowly, feeling something deep settle into place, a truth that needed time to reveal its shape. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. And finally, I understood that fully. My past was not my future. My wounds were not my identity. My survival was not the only remarkable thing about me. My peace was. My life was. My future was. I walked to the balcony and watched the sun lower through the trees, Nova pressing her head against my leg, tail swaying softly in the evening light. No hatred lived inside me anymore. No bitterness. No unfinished arguments. Just a quiet ending to a story that had taken too long to close. I whispered to the breeze to myself, to the girl I used to be, "It's over." And for the first time in my life, the ending felt like freedom, not loss. There is a moment in every story where the air changes, where the silence sharpens, where the truth does not simply come out. It breaks out, pushing against everything that tried to contain it. For me, that moment came the first time I stood alone on my balcony after the entire truth had been exposed publicly. The press conference, the video, the statements, the courtroom, the last desperate call from Joanne. All of it had unfolded like a long, dark corridor, finally opening into light. And yet, it was in this quiet, in the simple stillness of an ordinary evening that I felt the real impact settle into my chest. The truth had been seen, heard, believed, not debated, not twisted, not overshadowed by louder voices. It lived now in the world outside me, no longer a burden I carried alone. The sky over the Carolina tree line dimmed slowly, the last gold slipping behind the horizon, while Nova rested her head on my foot as if anchoring me to the present, making sure I did not drift too far into memory. For the first time since that night in October, I let myself replay the sequence not as trauma, but as testimony. The gun, the breath, the bang, the lies, the investigation, the unraveling of years of silent wounds, the people who showed up, the people who failed the law that stepped in the justice that unfolded with calm precision. I no longer replayed it with fear. I replayed it with clarity. This was my story, not theirs. And telling it even now brought a kind of exhale that felt like releasing the final remnants of weight I once thought I would carry forever. The breeze shifted, brushing warm air against my face, and I realized something else too. Something that settled deeply with the same gravity as truth itself. Stories like mine do not exist in isolation. They belong to countless people who have walked through betrayal disguised as family, loyalty disguised as obligation, pain disguised as normalcy. Too many people carry wounds inflicted not by strangers, but by the very people who were supposed to protect them, guide them, love them. And when betrayal comes from inside the walls of home, the world feels smaller, darker, harder to navigate. Healing requires not only courage, but witness someone who hears the truth and does not flinch. Someone willing to say, "I see you, I believe you, you deserved better." Standing on that balcony in the fading light, I knew my story was no longer just about me. It was about anyone who has ever felt the sting of being dismissed or blamed when they were the one in danger. Anyone who has been told to keep the peace while someone else set everything on fire. Anyone who has carried the shame of someone else's wrongdoing. Anyone who has walked away from blood relatives because loyalty was missing where it mattered most. The quiet around me pulsed like a heartbeat, as if the world itself leaned in, waiting for the words I had never spoken aloud before, but always felt deep in my bones. So if you are listening, if you are reading, if you are following this story to its final breath, I want to ask you something that might echo inside you long after this moment ends. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who should have protected you? Have you ever looked into the face of someone who shared your home, your name, your history, and realized they would rather let you break than face their own faults? Have you ever had to save yourself when no one stepped in? If you have, I want you to know this. You are not alone. You are not weak. You are not dramatic. You are not imagining things. You are someone who survived what others could not handle. And your story, even if it is quiet, even if it is hidden, carries the same weight, the same truth, the same power as mine. So tell me where you are watching from. Tell me where you are standing now in your own journey. Tell me what part of this story met you where you needed it most. Not because comments help the algorithm, not because engagement boosts the channel, but because stories like these become stronger when more voices rise from the shadows and step into the light. And if this story moved you, if something in it made your chest tighten, or your breath catch, or your eyes sting, if something in it reminded you of your own past, or your own strength, or your own survival, consider liking and subscribing. Not for me, but for the stories that still need to be told, for the people who still need to hear. That healing is possible, justice is possible, freedom is possible, that life after betrayal is not only real, but worth reaching for. The wind rustled the pine branches above me, carrying distant sounds of soldiers finishing evening PT laughter echoing faintly across the field. Life moved forward, always forward, and now I was moving with it not as someone defined by what happened to me, but as someone defined by what I chose after. I rested one hand on the balcony rail, eyes fixed on the last streak of fading light, and felt the quiet truth settle fully for the first time. This chapter was closing, but it was not a collapse. It was a liberation, and as the sky dimmed into deep blue and Nova pressed closer to my leg, I understood why stories like mine matter. Because when we speak the truth, when we let others witness our survival, when we stand firm in who we have become instead of who others tried to make us, we give someone else the courage to stand too. So I ask again, not as a soldier, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but simply as another human being who walked through fire and came out standing. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who should have protected you? Tell me where you are watching from. And if this story touched you, if it helped you breathe a little deeper or stand a little straighter, consider liking and subscribing so you do not miss the stories still waiting to unfold. Stories that might just help someone else find the strength to step into their own light, the way I finally stepped into mine. There is a certain stillness that comes only after a long storm, the kind that leaves the world washed clean and quiet, as if everything remembers how to breathe again. In the days that followed my final conversation with Joanne, a peaceful rhythm settled into my life, like a gentle tide rolling in steady, predictable, unforced. I woke up before sunrise each morning to the soft hum of the apartment and the sound of Nova stretching beside her bed with a sleepy groan. The world outside was always quiet in those moments, a light mist hovering over the pine trees, a handful of cars beginning their early commute, birds calling softly as if warming up for the day. We would walk along the familiar path behind the complex, my boots brushing lightly against the gravel. Nova's paws padding confidently ahead of me, her tail swaying gently. These walks became more than routine. They became the borders of my new life, stitching together the beginning and ending of each day, reminding me of how far I had come. After work, I returned home to the same warm lamplight spilling across the living room floor. The same soft presence of Nova, greeting me at the door with that eager, bright joy dogs never bother to hide. I hung my uniform neatly checked, Nova's food, straightened a few books on the shelf, then took a breath, feeling the small, quiet pride of someone who finally built a home that did not ache. I cooked dinner most nights, nothing fancy, sometimes just pasta or rice with vegetables, but there was something healing in the simple rhythm of chopping, stirring, tasting. There were no raised voices behind me, no tension waiting to snap, no footsteps that made my shoulders tighten. Just peace. A new kind of peace. A peace that came not from silence demanded by others, but from silence I chose. Sometimes after dinner, I would sit on the balcony with a cup of tea while Nova lay beside me, head resting on her paws. The evening breeze carried the scent of warm grass and pine, the kind of smell that always reminded me of long marches during training or late summer nights spent on duty at the motor pool. But now, there was no pressure attached to those memories, no weight pulling me backward. Instead, there was a soft blend of past and present, a reminder that I could honor where I came from without being trapped by it. A few times I found myself thinking about my father not with sadness, but with a kind, lingering warmth. I wondered what he would think of the life I was building, the home I had created for myself, the quiet confidence that was slowly returning. I imagined him sitting on this balcony with me smiling in that steady way he always did, the way that made even the hardest days feel manageable. Maybe in some small way the peace I found now honored him more than anything else could have. Therapy continued, though less frequently as the weeks passed. Dalton told me healing was not a destination, but a practice. something I would return to again and again as I grew more comfortable in my new life. She was right, of course. Healing was not dramatic. It was quiet, incremental, soft. It happened in the pauses, the breaths, the moments when I noticed that something that used to hurt no longer did. One afternoon on base, I found myself laughing at something a young specialist said during a supply check, and the sound startled me. Not because laughter was foreign, but because it came easily unforced, genuine. A sign that parts of me I thought were lost were still there, waiting for the right moment to rise again. I still thought about Dylan sometimes, not with anger or fear, but with distance. The kind of distance that happens when someone exits your life so cleanly, you eventually stop expecting them to return. What happened between us was a rupture, one that could never be repaired, but it no longer consumed my thoughts. It simply lived in the past where it belonged. Joanne, too, faded from my mind more each day. Her absence became another quiet in my life, not painful, not hollow, simply a space I no longer needed to fill. In the evenings, I sometimes scrolled through my phone, reading messages from friends on base, or watching silly videos that made Nova tilt her head in confusion. Life had become simple in a way I never knew I needed. A life built not from running away, but from choosing where to stand. And with each passing day, I realized something I had not been able to say before. I liked who I was becoming. Not just a survivor or a soldier or someone rebuilt from broken pieces, but a woman who finally allowed herself to exist fully without apology. On weekends, I visited the small farmers market downtown, picking up fresh bread or flowers for the apartment. I found a local cafe where the barista learned my order by heart, a place where the music was soft and the windows let in long sheets of sunlight. I started reading again, the kind of books I used to love when I was younger, before life demanded all my attention. And each time I opened a new chapter, I found myself smiling because it mirrored something inside me, a new chapter opening quietly, gently full of possibility. One Sunday evening, Nova and I sat by the lake behind the complex. The water shimmered silver under the soft glow of twilight. Fireflies blinked lazily in the grass. The world felt wide open, relaxed, unburdened. I leaned back on my hands, letting the cool ground support me, breathing in the moment. I thought about everything that happened, the betrayal, the fear, the justice, the healing, the rebuilding. And instead of sorrow, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the people who protected me, for the law that worked, for the therapy that steadied me, for the dog who sat beside me, for the strength I found when I thought I had none left. My life was no longer defined by what someone tried to do to me. It was defined by what I chose afterward. And what I chose was peace. I stood up, brushed off the grass, and looked down at Nova, who wagged her tail as if waiting for the next chapter too. "Come on, girl," I said softly. "Let's go home." She trotted beside me all the way back to the apartment where the warm lights welcomed us inside. And as I closed the door behind us, feeling the gentle quiet settle around me again, I realized something simple and profound. The story had ended, but my life was only beginning. And in the soft glow of that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I wanted to share more stories like this, ones of strength, resilience, justice, and healing. Stories that remind people they are not alone. Stories that help someone breathe easier. Stories that might just light a small candle in a dark room for someone who needs it. So when I sat down on the couch that night, Nova curling against my side, I lifted my phone, opened the Notes app, and wrote the first line of the next story waiting to be told. The world outside was calm. My heart was calm. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt gentle.